Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jerry Powell from Baylor Law School. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 2017 final round of the Top Gun National Invitational Mock Trial Competition. We are in the Kronzer courtroom at Baylor Law School, and the trial is commencing shortly. Before our judges come in, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the competitors to you, as well as to tell you who the scoring judges will be in today's trial. On behalf of the plaintiff will be represented by Christopher Ray Clark and his second chair, Nicholas Delafave. They are from Syracuse University. Thank you, gentlemen. Representing the defendant from Campbell University, Mr. Jacob Morse, and his second chair, Casey Peden. Thank you. The presiding judge in today's trial is the Honorable T. John Ward, retired United States District Judge for the Eastern District of Texas. The scoring judges in the jury box are Mary Ann Auld, Kelly Hart and Hallman, Fort Worth, Texas; Hayes Fuller, Naaman Howell Smith and Lee, Waco, Texas; Don Jackson, Ware Jackson, Lee, O'Neill, Smith and Barrow, Houston, Texas; Lisa Jameson, Pope, Hardwick, Christie, Shell, Kelly and Taplett, Fort Worth, Texas; Mark Mann, the Mann Firm, Henderson, Texas; and Jennifer Roustay, Hagens, Montgomery and Roustay, Houston, Texas. We will begin the trial very shortly.
Please be seated. Good afternoon, counsel. I'm going to call for announcements in this case, and all I need is whether you're ready or not at this time, then we'll take up some other matters as they come up. For the record, this is cause number 15-0291A, Taylor Reed Ashbrook, independent executors of the state of James Shane Reed versus Haley Nicole Wilson. It's pending in the County Court of Law number 1 of McLennan County, Texas. What says the plaintiff?
Good morning, Your Honor. Good evening, Your Honor. The plaintiff is ready.
And your name is?
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Christopher Ray Clark, and along with my co-counsel, Nicholas Delafave,
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
we proudly represent the plaintiff in today's case, Taylor Ashbrook.
Okay. For the defendant?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Jacob Morse, spelled like the code. I'm here with my co-counsel, Casey Peden, and we proudly represent the defendant in today's case, Ms. Haley Wilson.
Okay. Now then, what preliminary matters do we have from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. We have a few housekeeping matters.
All right. What are you calling housekeeping matters?
May we have freedom to move about the well during opening and closing statements?
You can move about the well during opening and closing statements, but not otherwise.
May we have Your Honor's preference for approaching opposing counsel or the witness?
Well, I believe the local rule provides you request permission to approach any witness. I think that's a good rule for approaching counsel unless I tell you otherwise.
Yes, Your Honor. All the exhibits in today's case have been pre-marked for identification. May the exhibits retain their pre-marking as they're entered in evidence?
Any objection
No
to that?
objection, Your Honor.
Okay, that's granted.
At several points throughout trial, Your Honor may wish to hear substantive arguments on objections. May we assume we're outside the presence of the jury for those objections?
If I entertain any argument, tell you I'm going to entertain argument, that means that constructively the jury is outside the presence of the room.
May we assume our witnesses have been pre-sworn?
That be pre-sworn, yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we move to invoke Rule 615.
Well, okay, now you're getting into substantive matter. Let's save that and we'll, I understand that's your request.
Your Honor, we have no procedural matters before the court.
Okay, Rule 6, you're invoking the rule, as we say, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, now then, how many witnesses are in the courtroom other than parties?
Well, Your Honor, for the plaintiff, we have two witnesses here today. First, our party representative, Ms. Taylor Ashbrook.
Well, she's excluded from the rule.
Yes, Your Honor, as well as an essential witness, Dr. Morrison, Dr. Eddie Morrison, who is an expert doctor in today's case.
Well, I don't know, you're requesting that the experts be allowed to stay in the courtroom?
Yes, Your Honor.
What's the defendant's position?
We would ask for the same courtesy.
Okay, so you've got your client.
We have our client, also a medical expert. In the need, we need to call it a handwriting expert, which we would also ask to be precluded from invoking the rule. We're not entirely sure if opposing counsel is going to call a handwriting expert.
Okay, any other fact witnesses that you intend to call other than?
Yes, Your Honor. One is present, and again, he may be called depending on the plaintiff's case. His name is Cameron Jordan.
Mr. Jordan, where are you? Mr. Jordan, you're going to have to remain outside the courtroom during the course of this trial because they've identified you as a potential fact witness. You're under the rule. What that means, Mr. Jordan, is you can't discuss this case with anyone other than lawyers in the case. And you have a duty, as they do, to make sure if you are discussing the case that no one is within earshot of your conversation. Anything you don't understand about that rule? I'm going to allow you to stay in the courtroom through opening statements. You can hear the opening statements, but you cannot stay to hear the testimony. Have a seat. You don't have any witnesses
No, Your
from the
Honor.
plaintiff?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, what other matters do you want?
Just the correct pronunciation and spelling of your last name.
It's Ward, W-A-R-D.
Yes, Your Honor, and with that, the plaintiff is ready for openings.
Any preliminary matters from the defendant?
Yes, Your Honor. We have one substantive matter before the court. By way of brief background, this is an inter vivos gift case in which we're here to determine whether Ms. Haley Wilson received a gift from Jimmy Reed and whether Mr. Reed had the capacity to have given that gift. Now, at this time, Your Honor, I ask that the court exclude any evidence of what Ms. Wilson might do with the gift she was given on September 20th, 2015. We're here to determine whether there was capacity in this case, not whether she's going to use the property in a manner that may be appropriate or inappropriate depending on whose opinion we're inquiring to. For that reason, Your Honor, I ask that the court exclude it under Rule 401 as it's irrelevant. It doesn't make a fact of consequence more or less probable.
You're asking for a motion in limine on
I am,
that?
Your Honor. My
Okay.
apologies.
Well, Your Honor, it's absolutely relevant to today's case, as this goes to the heart of Ms. Wilson's credibility. We have it on a good faith basis to believe that Ms. Wilson is going to claim that she was given this gift out of her enduring love for Mr. Reed. And given that statement of her affection and admiration, it's important for the jury to hear exactly what she's claiming she intends to do with the gift Mr. Reed gave her, so that the jury may evaluate whether or not to believe Ms. Wilson's statement that she is in fact in love and therefore not biased here today in court.
Well, let me tell you, what's the court's going to do? The court's going to grant the motion in limine. Now, what you need to make sure you understand is that when I grant the motion in limine, that means you're not to bring it up during the jury's presence. But if you want me to reconsider it because of, as I hear the testimony, that you think that you would like to make an argument, we'll have a brief argument on that point. You anybody misunderstand that?
No, sir.
No, Your Honor, crystal
All right,
clear.
that's my ruling.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
With that, the defense is ready to proceed.
Okay. Plaintiff's ready to proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, we'll hear opening statements at this time to the plaintiff.
May it please the court, Your Honor, opposing counsel, good afternoon, members of the jury. Jimmy Reed was locked out of his own mind. He was lying in a hospital bed. He was weak. He was sick. You can almost hear the sound of nurses' footsteps outside in the hallway. You can hear the constant beep from the heart monitor, letting him know he's alive. His body is hooked up to all types of machinery. In his arm, there's an IV constantly pumping prescription medication into his veins. These powerful prescription drugs, they're the only thing that allows him to tolerate the pain. The only thing that makes him able to go on. You see, it's not curing his pain, but it's numbing his mind. It's numbing his mind so he can't think about the pain, so that he can't think about anything. It was in that condition that the evidence will show Jimmy Reed signed away his life's work and his legacy. On September 20th, around 9 a.m., the evidence will show that Jimmy Reed, a local Wacoan, the owner of the Hippodrome Theater in downtown Waco, signed away his shares in that company to the defendant, Haley Wilson. But the evidence will also show that at the time he signed away his shares, he lacked the ability to know what he was doing, why he was doing it, and what the consequences were for what he was doing. Now, members of the jury, we're in Texas. Certainly nowhere other place knows better that a man has a right to do what he wants with his own property. But the good folks down in Austin, they decided that if you lack the mental capacity to understand and appreciate what you're doing, the gift you're given, the property you're letting go, well, the law says that's a wrongful conveyance. The law says that's illegal. And today, while Mr. Reed, he's not in this courtroom with us, unfortunately, he passed away 5 days after signing away his life's legacy. Mr. Reed's family is here. And they're asking you not to recover his reason, not to recover his life, but to take a man's legacy and give it back to its rightful owners. Now, we're the plaintiff. Today we have to prove by a preponderance of all the evidence that more likely than not, on September 20th, when James Reed signed over his 51% shares in the Hippodrome to Haley Wilson, he lacked the ability to reasonably understand what he was doing. And I'm sure Mr. Morris is going to be quick to point out that as the plaintiff, that's our burden. That's what we have to do. We have to provide you with evidence for each and every element of our claim, and we will do so today by proving 3 facts. First, we're going to show you that Jimmy Reed was gravely ill in September of 2015. Second, we're going to show you that Jimmy Reed received powerful prescription drugs in order to treat that illness. And third, that at the time he signed away his business, He was still under the influence of those powerful prescription drugs. You see, members of the jury, you're going to hear evidence today. And that evidence is going to tell you that in September of 2015, Mr. Reed, he fell gravely ill. He was sick. He was weak, unable to go about his daily task, unable to work at the Hippodrome, which was his passion. It got so bad he had to be hospitalized. And you're going to hear from his sister, Miss Taylor Ashbrook, when she takes a stand and she tells you, she walks you through day after day after day how her brother's condition worsened, all leading up to September 19th. Now that day is going to be important. Because you see, we're going to call a doctor that's going to tell you about the prescription drugs that were given to Jimmy Reed throughout his entire medical stay. But on September 19th, the evidence is going to show he was not on just one prescription painkiller, not on just 2 of these powerful prescription drugs. No, he was on 5. He was given a dose of 5 prescription painkillers. And members of the jury, you're going to hear how those painkillers, they have a lasting effect. In fact, they have a lasting effect in a healthy person anywhere up to 24 hours. When Miss Wilson went to visit Jimmy Reed, it wasn't 24 hours later. The evidence is going to show it was just a mere 17. And you're going to hear how on September 20th, she walked out of Jimmy Reed's hospital room with a note promising her millions of dollars. Today, the evidence is going to show that when James Reed signed that note, he was unable to understand what he was doing. He was unable to understand why he was doing it, and he was unable to understand the consequences of his actions. And while the law acknowledges a man can do what he wants with his own property, James Reed, because of those powerful prescription drugs, was powerless to protect himself. Today, you have the opportunity, you have the duty to protect James Reed. Find the defendant liable, because James Reed was locked out of his own mind. Thank you.
Counsel? All right, for the defendant.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court.
Counsel.
Opposing counsel, members of the jury, when people make their dying wishes and they choose what they want to do with their property, they don't get to undo their decision just because they don't like it. Members of the jury, good afternoon. My name is Jacob Morse, and I'm here with my co-counsel, Casey Peden, proudly representing the defendant in today's case, the executor of the estate of Jimmy Reed, Miss Haley Wilson. Now, I want to take you back to 2005, where this story all begins. You see, Haley is set up on a blind date by her best friend, Cameron Jordan. She knows that the person she's going to go on a date with is Jimmy Reed, another mutual friend of Mr. Jordan's. She knows about Jimmy. He's a successful businessman here in Waco. He makes a living buying and selling properties or flipping them after he's renovated them and turned them into something new. So she gets to the bar, the restaurant where they're going to eat. She sits down and she beat Jimmy to the restaurant. She orders her favorite martini and she takes a sip. Then she looks over and she sees Jimmy walk in. He's older, he's graying, but he's a handsome guy. She's excited for the date. She sees the confidence he has, the passion with the way he lives. he walks over, he sits down, and as he does so, he sees Miss Wilson. And he realizes she too has that confidence he admires. You see, she's a successful businesswoman. She's on her way to open her own beauty salon, also here in Waco. Jimmy sits down, he looks at the bartender, and he says, "I'll have whatever she's having." It's in that moment that their romance begins. The two had love at first sight, and from there they began their relationship. They pushed each other in their passions, Jimmy assisting her by providing a rental home free of charge so that she could devote her resources to her salon. At the same time, she pushes Jimmy in his passions. You see, Jimmy's a movie buff. He loves film. And so he wants to open a theater. When she gets out of the salon, she goes down to this property called the Hippodrome, a new investment of Jimmy's, where she helps him renovate and helps him fix up the place so that this dilapidated property can be restored into something Waco is proud to have downtown. A place where Wacoans of all types can go and enjoy film, dinner, drinks, dancing, and live performances. Jimmy cultivates the menu, naming the restaurant items after his favorite films. And Miss Wilson is there at each step of the way, willing to go to the kitchen if she needs, willing to help on the books, or even ring up movie tickets. Now, the two of them had a loving relationship. But like most relationships, not everything's perfect. And in fact, as you'll hear today, Jimmy had a flaw. He was not faithful to Miss Wilson. You'll hear today that on 2 occasions he cheated on her, and after the first, she was willing to take him back. But you'll hear in 2014, after nearly 10 years in their relationship, no matter how much she still loved him, she couldn't let herself be vulnerable to that again. And so they broke it off. The true tragedy of this story, however, is that less than a year later, Jimmy Reed was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He was sent to the hospital, and he knew, as the evidence will show, that he did not have the time he needed to win Miss Wilson back. It's there on his deathbed where he made his wish known. It's there where he made his decision about his property to give the Hippodrome controlling interest to Miss Wilson. And today, the plaintiff is asking you to undo his decision because they don't like it. Now, as Mr. Clark did point out, he does have the burden of proof today. That means from the moment this trial started until the moment you go back in that deliberation room, it's his job to bring you the evidence you would need to undo Jimmy Reed's decision. He has to prove to you that it is more likely than not that Jimmy Reed did not have the mental capacity to make that decision, to give away his 51% interest to Miss Wilson. Members of the jury, Mr. Clark is going to fail on that burden today. But in doing so, you're going to hear some medical testimony. And yes, you will hear about prescription drugs and whatever impacts they may have had on Jimmy Reed. When you're listening to that evidence, I ask that you pay close attention to who's giving that testimony. You see, opposing counsel is going to bring forth a man who comes to the witness stand for a living. This is his job, to convince juries what he wants them to. You'll hear today that it isn't his first time working with plaintiff's counsel, and he is being paid for his testimony. Most notably, you'll hear that he never laid eyes on Jimmy Reed, but he'll come to this courtroom today to provide you a diagnosis of a patient he's never met. Which is why we will bring Jimmy's doctor to this courtroom, the physician who saw him the moment he walked in to the hospital, or was brought in rather, until his unfortunate death on September 25th, 2015. You'll hear from Dr. Reisinger that in fact, Jimmy never had delirium. On the day he wrote the note, his neurological exams at 1 a.m., 9 a.m., and 5 p.m. all checked out. Those prescription drugs we've already heard so much about didn't take away from his mental abilities. You're also going to hear from Miss Wilson, and she will come up here and walk you through the relationship that she and Jimmy had. She'll tell you about the ups, and she'll tell you about the downs. And then she will walk you through that fateful hour on September 20th, where her and Jimmy were able to spend their last time together. She'll tell you about the tears, about their conversation, and how at the surprise at the end of their visit, Jimmy wrote a note. A note that gave her 51% of the ownership of the Hippodrome. Now, at the end of today's case, His Honor will instruct you on the law as it is here in this jurisdiction, here in Texas, where we believe that people are allowed to give gifts when they choose. He'll tell you that it is the plaintiff's burden to undo the decision that was made on September 20th. And when he walks you through that law, I ask that you return a verdict that says, Jimmy Reed had that capacity. And I ask that you tell the plaintiff they don't get to undo his deathbed wish, his decision, just because they don't like it. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. All right, who'll be the first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The first witness that the plaintiff calls is Miss Taylor Ashbrook.
All right, come around. Witness has been previously sworn. Counsel, I should have forewarned you that this morning I walked off without my hearing aids, so be sure and keep your voice up
Yes, Your Honor.
for my benefit and for the microphone for the benefit of the jury, okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you.
May I proceed?
Please do.
Good afternoon. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
I'm Taylor Ashbrook. I'm Jimmy Reed's sister.
Where are you from, Miss Ashbrook?
I'm a Wacoan now. I'm originally from California.
Are you employed?
Yes. I'm a Baylor, I work at the Department of Religion. I do business and financial stuff there.
Do you have a history in business and finance?
Yes, I graduated from SMU and got a job right out of college with KPMG and worked there for a while and then worked at JRBT here in town for a few years before I took this job.
Tell us, Miss Ashbrook, why are we here today?
We're here because my brother supposedly gave his shares of the Hippodrome to his ex-girlfriend, and I don't believe that he wrote a note, but I don't believe that the note was written by him.
No. Miss Ashbrook, I'd like to talk about your brother. Would you be able to identify a picture of him?
Yes.
Your Honor, permission to publish what's been previously admitted is
Granted.
36.
That's my brother.
Could you please tell us who's that man picture with you and state his name for the record?
That's Jimmy Reed, my brother.
Were you and Mr. Reed close?
Very.
Could you please describe Mr. Reed for the members of the jury? What was he like?
He was really fun and outgoing. He was very unique, kind of always did what he wanted and it was always something fun. He was very close to my children. I've got 2 kids. He was very close to them. He was always the fun uncle, always kind of doing things that I would never say that my kids could do, but he would take them to go do those things. He was a big movie buff. He loved downtown Waco. He was a hard worker. I could go on. All the positive attributes you can think of, he had those.
Was your brother Jimmy, was he employed?
Yes.
Where was he employed?
Well, he was the majority owner of the Hippodrome, and he also just flipped houses basically on the side now.
Please tell the members of the jury, what is the Hippodrome?
The Hippodrome is a 100-year-old or 103-year-old theater in downtown Waco that was dilapidated, And we purchased the Hippodrome and did a renovation on it, and now it is a dine-in movie theater. We do live events,
You said we.
weddings.
You
Right.
said we do these things. Does that mean you have some involvement with the running of the Hippodrome?
Yes, I have a 10% interest in the Hippodrome.
When did the Hippodrome open?
2012.
And when the Hippodrome opened, what was your level of involvement?
I did everything from, I've done everything at the Hippodrome. I basically was originally doing the books just because of my financial background. And I was a programming director, but you know, when you work there, everything's your job. So I've served popcorn, I've done it all.
How involved with the day-to-day operations was your brother Jimmy?
He was there day to day, every day. So he's very involved.
Could you tell the members of the jury, did your brother ever have any discussions with you regarding his will?
Well, yeah, I mean, he didn't have a wife, so I was the closest person to him. We lost our parents a long time ago, so he had talked to us about, me and my husband, about leaving everything to me and my kids.
Did he ever speak with you about the Hippodrome specifically?
Yes, he did. He said that he was going to leave his shares to us.
About what year was that?
I would say that was in 2009, 2010.
Drawing your attention to 2014, did you and your brother have a discussion about him leaving the Hippodrome to you then?
Yes, we talked about it.
Was that the only time you and your brother talked about someone inheriting his shares of the Hippodrome?
Yeah.
Drawing your attention to 2013, did you and your brother ever have a discussion about Haley Wilson and his shares at the Hippodrome?
He had mentioned leaving something to her, but certainly not everything.
So the last time you spoke with your brother about the Hippodrome and his shares, you said he was leaving them to you. Drawing your attention to 2015, was your brother still heavily involved in the day-to-day operations?
Well, in 2015, he had backed off a little bit because he had become ill. And so he worked from home a lot, but he was not able to be down there at the Hippodrome for, you know, everything that was going on. So he would make phone calls, he would try to schedule events and maintain relationships, he would pay bills, but he was not as hands-on as he had been in the previous years.
What were the nature of your brother's medical problems?
Well, he had been experiencing some really bad pain in his back for a while, and just several other symptoms, that being the main one. And then it turned out that he had pancreatic cancer, so he was dealing with that.
I want to walk the jury through more of a timeline of just the year of 2015. About what time in the year did your brother start complaining about pain in his back?
It was around August.
All right, and after your brother started complaining in August of 2015, did his injuries, withdrawn. After your brother started complaining in about August of 2015, did your brother's condition get any better?
No, it got worse.
What do you mean it got worse?
The pain got worse. He was in a lot of pain. That was his main symptom, was pain, and got significantly worse over the weeks and months.
Well, when you say significantly worse, what do you mean?
He was doubled over in pain. By the time we ended up taking him to the hospital, he was doubled over in the back seat. Basically, couldn't even breathe. He was just in so much pain. He couldn't even make a sound.
Were you looking after your brother during that period?
I mean, not like at his house. I wasn't staying there with him or anything, but I mean, yeah, he had said that he had mentioned that he wasn't feeling well, so his current girlfriend and I had gone over to check on him, and he was doing terrible. So we got him in the car and took him over to the hospital.
What's the name of his current girlfriend during that time in 2015?
Megan.
Is that Megan Wood?
Megan Wood.
Now, Miss Ashbrook, you said you took your brother to the hospital. What day was that?
That was on September 17th.
Your Honor, permission to display for demonstrative purposes only a timeline of events. so the jury can follow along?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen the timeline, Your Honor, but no objection at this time.
All right, proceed.
Now, you mentioned on September 17th you took your brother to the hospital. Can we put that on there? Talk about his condition on the 17th when you took him to the hospital.
It was awful. It was terrifying. Tears rolling down his face, but no noise coming out of his mouth. I mean, he couldn't function. There was no way he would have been able to have taken himself to the hospital, or, I think it was absolutely the worst pain I've ever seen anyone in.
Now, did the doctors, to your knowledge, to the best of your knowledge, give him any kind of medication?
That day, they gave him a little bit of pain medication, yes.
Did your brother's condition get any better the following day, on the 18th?
On the 18th, it was a little bit, I would say. I wouldn't say, though, that he was feeling good and well enough to go home.
Did you find out what exact ailment your brother had?
Yes, they had run a test and found out that he had pancreatic cancer.
And that was on the 18th? After the 18th, when you found out your brother had pancreatic cancer, did your brother undergo any kind of procedures?
I mean, he had just the testings and things of that nature, but no other procedures.
And did your brother's condition get any better on the 18th?
No. On the 18th, he was in and out of it, but I mean, he was better than the day before, but definitely, like I said, not well enough to go home.
So on the 19th, was your brother still in the hospital?
Yes.
And on the 19th, did your brother undergo any kind of procedures related to his illness?
I don't recall.
At any point in time during your brother's hospital stay, did doctors run a biopsy to figure out what kind of cancer he had?
Yes, they did.
And when was that biopsy done?
It was probably during that time, so I would say probably the 19th.
Do you remember about what time of day that biopsy was done on the 19th?
Midday?
What the time, 2 p.m. sound about right?
Yeah.
Now, when that biopsy was done at 2 p.m., was your brother, withdrawn, Your Honor. Describe your brother's condition before his biopsy procedure on September 19th.
On September 19th, before the biopsy, he was pretty groggy, sleeping a lot, I would say, taking advantage of the medicine that he was given. You know, they had a little pump that he would push whenever he was when he started to feel the pain again. And he was groggy in and out of it. He quoted movie quotes and kind of didn't make any sense.
After your brother's biopsy procedure, did his condition appear to change?
Yeah, he continued to get worse after that.
Can you describe your brother's condition after his biopsy procedure?
Just basically not making any sense, incoherent. I would say delirious.
After your brother's biopsy procedure, did you stay at the hospital?
Yes.
How long did you stay?
That night? Are you asking about that night?
On September 19th, how long did you stay at the hospital?
Pretty late, probably 7 or 8 p.m. till I had to go home to the kids.
And did you see any change in your brother's condition over that time?
No.
No. Did you visit your brother on September the 20th?
Yes.
And could you describe his condition on the morning of the 20th for the court?
It didn't change much. It was basically the same. I walked in, he was able to open his eyes and talk to me, but nothing, things weren't making any sense, and still quoting old movies and not making any sense. Totally exhausted. Seemed like his pain, his physical pain was exhausting him.
About what time did you arrive at your brother's hospital room on the morning of September 20th?
Around 8:45, 9.
And how long did you stay at your brother's hospital room?
That morning I didn't stay for very long that morning.
Did your brother have any visitors around that time?
Yeah, Megan was there. I was with Megan. I was talking with her outside, and Haley came.
Now, you said Haley. Are you referring to Haley Wilson?
Yeah, Haley Wilson, his ex-girlfriend.
Are you aware as to how Miss Wilson knew your brother was in the hospital?
Yeah, I had actually told her.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Well, overruled, I heard her said she actually told her. I don't think it's speculation.
Yes, Your Honor.
You were saying you actually told Miss Wilson your brother was in the hospital?
I told her and a few other people that he was in the hospital and he wasn't doing well. So I actually, just on text, so
So it wasn't a surprise to you when Miss Wilson arrived that morning?
not at all.
Did you leave Miss Wilson alone with your brother that morning?
Yeah, me and Megan went down to eat breakfast and left her there.
Before you left your brother with Miss Wilson, can you describe his condition and his state as it appeared to you on that day?
The same as before, groggy, tired, I'd say irritable every once in a while, and then he would get a dose of pain medication and that would calm him down a little bit. Not making any sense with what he was saying, but then it was just like he'd go in and out, and then whenever he was in, it still wasn't normal.
Now, how long did you stay with Miss Wood at breakfast?
We were there for about an hour.
When you returned, was Miss Wilson still with your brother?
She was ending her visit with him.
Did you have any conversation with Miss Wilson as she was ending her conversation?
We just hugged, and I told her I would keep her updated, and told her it was good to see her.
Did Miss Wilson mention anything about a note or a gift from your brother?
No.
Did you go inside your brother's room once you finished talking to Miss Wilson?
Yes, I did.
And can you describe his condition after the time he met with Miss Wilson on that day?
I was able to talk to him a little bit. There wasn't much, he was still groggy and tired. He was exhausted, but he didn't mention anything about a note either.
About how long did Miss Wilson visit with your brother?
About an hour.
And about what time of day was that?
That was in the morning, approximately from about 9 to 10.
After September 20th, did your brother's condition improve at all?
No, it got worse.
What do you mean?
He just obviously took a downhill turn, and it was just, it was painful to watch.
Ms. Ashbrook, please tell the members of the jury, when did your brother pass away?
On September 25th.
After your brother passed away, did you take any action to see to his affairs?
Yeah, I'm the executor of his will. I was basically all he had. So, everything, it was all my responsibility. It was, so yes, we did.
And when did you start handling Mr. Reed's possessions?
Just a few days later.
Drawing your attention to the month of October, would you tell us what actions, if any, did you take on behalf of Mr. Reed's estate?
Well, I just got with a lawyer, and we were just kind of diving through what all he had in his estate and what was going to go where.
And what were you basing your decisions on that estate and how it would be dealt with? What were you basing that off of?
His latest will,
And what year was that will from?
2014.
Were there any complications with handling Mr. Reed's estate?
Yes.
And what were they?
Well, when I had actually called and talked to Cameron and found out, and through my lawyer found out that 51% of the Hippodrome, which was all of Jimmy's shares, had been willed to her on his deathbed by way of a note that I didn't know about.
When did Miss Wilson, to your knowledge, visit with your brother?
On the 20th.
Thank you,
So-
Ms. Ashbrook. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Proceed, please.
Ms. Ashbrook, I'd like to visit with you some more about stuff you talked about on direct examination. And first, I'd like to just ask about this lawsuit. Now, you're suing Ms. Wilson today, right? Mm-hmm. Is that a yes?
Yes.
And you're asking the court and the jury to undo the gift that was given on September 20th, 2015, right?
I don't consider it a gift.
But you're asking to get that back.
Yes.
Now, that 51% has a monetary value, doesn't it?
Yes.
In fact, you're aware that the Hippodrome's been appraised at a value of about $2.5 million,
Yes, sir.
which means 51% is about $1.275 million, right?
Correct.
All right, now I want to ask about the relationship between Jimmy, your brother, and Miss Wilson. She was the longest girlfriend that your brother ever had, isn't that true?
That's correct.
They dated almost 10 years. Yes?
Yes.
Throughout that time, you and her actually became pretty good friends.
Correct.
You observed Jimmy and her together on a number of occasions, right?
Yes.
And actually, she participated in a lot of family functions you all had, right?
Correct.
That means holidays, Haley was there, right?
Yes.
You have kids,
Yes.
and in fact, you trusted her with your kids on multiple occasions.
Yes.
In fact, your daughter loved to go hang out at the salon that she owns.
Yes.
Now, you know that throughout the course of things, they eventually broke up, right?
Yes.
But that wasn't before multiple times going on dates with you and your husband together as double dates.
Correct.
And you're aware that she helped Jimmy with work down at the Hippodrome.
Yes.
She would go, and she wasn't on paid staff, right?
No.
She wasn't being paid at all for the things she did at the Hippodrome.
No.
Now, I want to talk some more then about the hospital and what happened. So your brother was diagnosed on the 17th, right?
Yes.
And then on the 18th, he was in the hospital and he had been given some pain medication. But originally you said that pain was so bad that he had trouble speaking, right?
Correct.
But you actually believed he was being stoic.
Yeah.
You thought he was trying to stay strong for you and your family.
Right.
Well, then on the 18th, you also said that, and this might be silly to ask, but he gave some instructions about his dog, didn't he?
Yes.
He told you exactly where to go to find the right dog food, right?
That's correct.
And you listened to him and you went and found the dog food, right?
Right.
Exactly where he said it was. He told you how much to feed the dog.
Correct.
And then on the 19th, you said that he underwent a procedure. You commented during your direct examination that he was a little groggy beforehand. You remember that?
Yes.
But there's some other things that happened on the 19th that we should discuss here. Now, Jimmy was also the manager of the Hippodrome, right?
Correct.
Which meant he had responsibilities to make sure that that business was running smoothly. You knew that.
Yes.
And on that day, he asked you to go down to the Hippodrome and pick up some invoices that needed to be paid.
Correct.
So you did. You went down to the Hippodrome.
Yes.
He told you where to find the right checkbook, and he gave, in your words, meticulous instruction. Right?
Yes.
And you complied with those instructions and went and got the items? Yes?
Yes.
And you brought them back to the hospital.
Yes.
It's in the hospital that you assisted Jimmy in signing checks to pay those invoices, right?
Correct.
You didn't doubt whether he understood what you were saying, did you?
No.
In fact, you believed he knew exactly what he was doing, invoice by invoice.
Well, yeah, because that's why I was there. I mean, I was helping him.
Right. So you knew that some invoices he said to pay, right?
Correct.
And some of them he kind of made jokes about how he wasn't paying that one yet.
Correct.
So he was able to discern between the invoices he thought were important and the ones he didn't, right?
Correct.
So then he had his procedure, and it was the next morning that he saw Miss Wilson.
Yes.
Now, I just want to make sure we're clear here. The two of them were in the room without anyone else, right?
Yes.
Which meant you can't tell us what they talked about,
Correct.
right? You can't tell us what they discussed, right? But you are aware that he was visited by nurses and doctors throughout that entire day.
Yes.
And you talked to some of them,
Yes.
and you know that they were keeping medical records of the things that were going on.
Yes.
The next day was the 21st, and I want to make sure that timeline's clear. On that day, Jimmy did have his cell phone with him, didn't he?
Yes.
He had it right next to his bed there at the hospital. Now, you mentioned on your direct that you didn't hear about this note from Miss Wilson, right?
Correct.
But let's be clear here. What was written in that note actually served to take away what you would have earned under the will's language, right?
Correct.
Thank you, Ms. Ashbrook. Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Redirect?
No, Your Honor, we just asked the witness to be allowed to step down.
Okay. You may step down. Thank you, ma'am. Who will be the next witness?
Yes, Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff calls as an adverse party witness Dr. Donnie Reisinger.
All right. Come around, doctor, and have a seat.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Please do.
Dr. Reisinger, you're a medical doctor.
Yes,
You graduated from college,
yes,
and you went to medical school.
yes.
What medical school was that?
University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston.
After graduating from medical school, you completed your residencies,
That's correct.
and you have a license
Yes,
in the state of Texas.
yes,
You've been practicing medicine for over 30 years.
correct,
You're a physician at the McLennan County General Hospital.
correct.
And in your capacity as a physician, you actually treated Mr. Jimmy Reed.
Correct.
Now, doctor, through the course of your treatment of Mr. Reed, you kept notes, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
You'd be able to recognize those notes if you saw them today?
Yes,
Your Honor, permission to approach opposing counsel and the witness with what's been previously marked as Exhibit Number 3?
Yes, granted.
Entire document.
Yes. Dr. Reisinger, I'm handing you what's been previously marked for identification as Exhibit Number 3. You recognize that document?
I do.
Those are your notes from your care of Mr. Jimmy Reed.
Correct.
Those notes are in the same or substantially similar condition to the last time you saw them.
Could you repeat that, please?
Yes, doctor. Those notes are in the same or substantially similar condition to the last time you saw them?
Let me look at them just a second, please.
Yes, doctor.
Yes, they appear to be in the same order.
And they were prepared by you.
That's correct.
Your Honor, at this time, we offer into evidence what's been previously marked as Exhibit 3 into
No
evidence
objection.
as Exhibit 3.
No objection, Your Honor.
Received into evidence.
Permission to retrieve from the witness.
Granted. Well, are you going to ask him any question about the notes?
Your Honor, I'll display the questions through the technology if that's permitted.
Okay. It's not a memory test, you know, not for the doctor.
Yes, Your Honor, I wouldn't want it to be. Now, Dr. Reisinger, you treated Mr. Reed through September 17th through the 25th when he died.
That's correct.
Now, during that time, I'd like to go over a timeline of events and how you treated him. Can we pull up a timeline? Specifically, Dr. Reisinger, Mr. Reed came in on the 17th complaining of back problems, isn't that right?
That's correct.
Now, in order to treat his pain, you actually prescribed him 2 painkillers, isn't that right?
I prescribed him different pain medication during his stay, yes.
That's right, sir. First, you provided him with Dilaudid. Am I pronouncing that correctly, doctor?
That's correct, yes.
And then you put him on morphine, isn't that right?
That's correct.
And on the 18th, you didn't see any improvement in his condition.
No,
So in fact, sir, you actually installed a PCA pump for him to treat his breakthrough pain. Isn't that right?
that's correct.
Now, a PCA pump, it actually allows the patient to click it and get a quick shot of morphine. Is that right, doctor?
That's correct.
Just to be clear, that PCA pump, if you press it too many times, it actually locks the patient out of getting that medication.
That's correct. That's to prevent overdose.
That's right, doctor, because if the patient has clicked that button, they've taken more medication than they were supposed to in the allotted time you prescribed for it.
That's correct.
Now, doctor, to be clear, at 2 p.m. on the 19th of September, you actually had the patient, Mr. Reed, undergo a biopsy, right?
Yes, he went through an upper GI endoscopy with what is called an ERCP, which is an exam that is designed to visualize the common bile duct.
That's right, doctor. Now, essentially, you were looking for the cancer.
That's correct.
And in order for him to undergo this procedure, you had to prescribe additional painkillers, isn't that right?
Relaxants and pain medication.
As well as anesthesia, right?
Actually, there's no general anesthesia. I mean, it's all with these medications.
Yes, sir. And so you prescribed him 3 medications at that time, right?
That's correct.
In addition to the 2 medications he was already taking.
That's correct.
Now, those 3 medications that you prescribed him, and I'm going to try and pronounce this right, were fentanyl, Versed, and propofol. Is that correct?
Could I see, do you have a chart of that, please?
A chart of the medication that you
Yes.
prescribed him? Sure. Your Honor, permission to approach the witness?
Right.
And to clarify a point, these medications, the additional ones, are actually prescribed by the anesthesiologist or the nurse anesthetist. They're not directly prescribed by me, okay?
Oh, Dr. Reisinger, okay, my apologies.
No problem.
But
No
you are
problem.
aware that for that procedure, he was given 3 additional levels of pain, 3 additional pain prescriptions, isn't that right?
And that's correct.
And they were, in fact, Versed, propofol, and fentanyl. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, after receiving those 3 drugs, Mr. Reed was actually had 5 prescription medications in his body. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Now, those 5 prescription medications have a lingering effect in the body. Isn't that right?
Some of them can last up to 24 hours.
That's right, sir. Now, the last time he was administered all 5 of those medications was at 3 p.m. on the 19th of September at the end of his procedure, right?
Well, they were probably, most of them were administered at the beginning of his procedure.
But certainly some of those medications were...
Probably an hour before that, but we're only an hour different in the time you were ascribing.
Yes, Dr. Reisinger, we'll take your number. So about 2 p.m. on
Yes,
the 19th was the
yes.
last time he received all 5 of those medications in a bunch, right?
That's correct.
So if I understand you correctly, the lingering effect would possibly make those drugs last in his system until 24 hours later, which would be 2 p.m. on the 20th of September?
Approximately.
Dr. Reisinger, after you, excuse me, Dr. Reisinger, after Mr. Reed was done with his examination, his procedure, on the 19th of September, you actually went to visit him, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And you found that his mental capacity, his mental state was actually abnormal.
That's correct.
Which wasn't surprising for you, right?
That's not surprising. And could I see my notes on that date?
Sure, Doctor.
Please. That's been a long time ago.
Actually, can we put those notes up? Doctor, we actually have those notes here on the projector screen, and I'd like to ask you a question specifically about that visit from that day. Specifically, Doctor, you noted that you were deferring discussion of treatment options until Mr. Reed was more himself. Did I read that correctly?
That's correct.
So in fact, Doctor, you then believe that Mr. Reed on the 19th at night was capable of making decisions for his own medical treatment. Isn't that right?
We had previously discussed what we thought he might need in the way of treatment. And at that time, I thought it was better to defer that additional discussion with him until the following day.
Until the drugs had cleared his system and he was more of himself.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Dr. Reisinger. No further questions, Your Honor.
Questions?
Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to inquire with the court procedurally if I'd be allowed to conduct a cross-examination, if you will, but then later also call Dr. Reisinger in the defense case in chief.
Well, he called him as an adverse witness. You didn't object.
No, I had no objection to that procedure, Your Honor. I just want to make sure that if I ask questions now, I'm not forfeiting the opportunity to do so during my case.
Well, no, you're not. You will not be forfeiting the opportunity to do so in your case. The time will be charged against your time when you're questioning the witness.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Please do.
Dr. Reisinger, opposing counsel just asked you about a PCA, or a patient-controlled analgesic.
That's correct.
Could you clarify with the jury as to what that is?
It's simply a device that has a little push button on the top of it that lets the patient control the amount of pain medication they are receiving. And as we previously described, it has these lockout mechanisms and controls how much of the medication they get so that they can't overdose. But when they're having severe pain, they can push the button and get a jolt of the medicine, and it helps them relieve their pain. And we find that patients use less pain medication if they are able to control it themselves than if we prescribe it at intervals. And that's why it's used.
Thank you, doctor. And I also want to clarify, opposing counsel pointed out that there were at one time 5 different medications in Mr. Reed's bloodstream. Is that unusual for someone who's experiencing stage 4 pancreatic cancer and undergoing biopsies?
No, it would be well within normal parameters. And like I say, 3 of these medications were prescribed by anesthesia for this short interval time that they were doing this procedure.
And Your Honor, at this time I ask permission to enlarge that exhibit that was just discussed, the records that are already in evidence.
That's fine.
It's page 14 for opposing counsel's reference. Now, opposing counsel highlighted the second sentence, doctor. Do you mind reading that first sentence for us?
Patient is still very groggy from anesthesia, but generally understands the findings from the procedure and that the prognosis is limited.
I want to break that down for the jury. First, would Jimmy Reed have been awake?
Yes.
And to point your attention to the top of this document, in military time, what is 1945?
That's 7:45 p.m. for all you civilians.
Thank you, doctor. Now, that would mean that 4 hours after his surgery, he was awake, right?
That's correct.
And here it says he generally understands the findings. So that would mean he could understand what you're saying.
Generally so, yes.
And he understands what that prognosis was, limited.
That's correct.
Thank you, doctor. Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Any further?
Dr. Reisinger, just a point of clarification. You deferred discussion of his treatment options until the patient was more himself. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, on the next day, you saw the patient twice. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
The first time you saw him was at 10:25, right?
Could I see those records, please?
Yes. Could we please bring that up? I'll just do it the old-fashioned way. Your Honor, permission to approach the witness?
Yes, permission granted. Some of us understand the old-fashioned way.
Here we go. I'd like the one from the 20th, please. May I approach the witness, Doc? Oh, there we go. Doctor, you went to see him on the 20th at 10:15?
I do not have that one in front of me. Yes, this is the 10:15 one. Yes, go ahead.
And Doctor, just to be clear, nowhere in these notes do you indicate that you actually discussed treatment options with him on that day?
Could I see the second page of that note,
Yes,
please?
please.
I did not record it, if I did.
So Doctor, at 10:15 on September 20th, you still didn't feel as if the patient was enough of himself to discuss his treatment options. Is that fair, sir?
I may have just decided to wait longer.
Thank you, Dr. Reisinger. No further questions.
Recross, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Briefly, doctor.
Now, that's a key word there, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. My co-counsel is going to pull up that record we just looked at, doctor, and I would like to point your attention to one portion, and it specifically relates to whether you had discussed treatment options at that point. We're going to flip to the right page here, and I'll ask that she zoom in and it says assessment/plan will follow. What does that mean?
That means I'm just going to continue following him and continue directing his care.
Thank you, Doctor. No further questions, Your Honor.
All through?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, this witness may step down. I believe they're going to recall you, they indicate, though, Doctor. Thank you. Who next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we call to the stand Dr. Eddie Morrison. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Please do.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
My name is Dr. Eddie Morrison.
Dr. Morrison, are you a medical doctor?
Yes, I am.
Where are you employed?
I'm work emergency rooms, primarily in the Dallas area. My headquarters are at Baylor Medical Center in Dallas.
Dr. Morrison, where did you go to college?
I went to college at Southern Methodist University in Dallas.
And where did you go to med school?
I went to Southwestern Medical School in Dallas.
After completing medical school, did you conduct any, withdrawn, Your Honor, did you participate in a residency?
Yes, I did a residency in emergency medicine at Parkland Hospital.
How long have you been a doctor?
Almost 40 years.
How long have you been licensed?
40 years
Where are you licensed?
in the state of Texas.
Now, you mentioned that you're an emergency room resident. Did I say that correctly, Doctor?
Physician.
An emergency room physician.
Yeah, I was a resident back in 1974. But
What exactly does a emergency room physician do?
Okay. Well, we see the patients that come into the hospital. It might be from a car wreck or a shooting, or it might be somebody gravely ill from a medical condition like diabetes or a heart attack. And then we see patients that come in with that are just sick, and they don't know why they're sick. They just come to the hospital.
In the course of your work, do you have to make certain types of mental assessments of patients?
Well, almost everybody that comes into the hospital has some mental concerns, some issues, some worries.
Would you say that you're, how are you involved in today's case?
I was asked to review the records and make a judgment as to the patient.
Have you done this, Doctor?
The deceased, actually.
Have you done this type of work before?
Yes, I have.
How many times?
Well, over the course of my 40 years, I guess maybe 30, 40 times maybe.
No. Dr. Morrison, are you being paid here today?
Yes, I am.
And how much are you being paid?
Well, I'm being paid for the time I take away from seeing patients. So my usual charge is $400 an hour to review records.
Did being paid influence your opinions or conclusions here today?
No, I just read the records and reach my own conclusions.
You mentioned you read the records. What, if any, records did you review?
Well, I reviewed all of the hospital charts, the physician's notes, the nurse's notes, the anesthesia record.
Doctor, based upon your review of the records, were you able to formulate any conclusions today?
Well, the deceased, Mr. Reed, suffered, unfortunately, from a very aggressive form of cancer of the pancreas, which was not diagnosed until a very late stage, and he went downhill very fast, required a lot of drugs to be comfortable, and unfortunately there was nothing that could be done.
Dr. Morrison, were all of the conclusions that you reached today were all the conclusions that you reached today done so with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes.
And did you employ practices, the best practices used in your field?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time we tender Dr. Eddie Morrison as an expert witness.
He'll be allowed to express his opinions.
Dr. Morrison, have you been in the courtroom here today?
Yes, I've been in the courtroom.
And you heard the testimony of Dr. Reinzinger?
Yes, I did.
Did you review Dr. Reinzinger's notes in preparation for your testimony?
Yes, I did.
Now, I'd like to talk specifically about the drugs that Dr. Reinzinger said Mr. Reed was given on September 19th. Do you remember what those drugs were?
Well, he was already receiving two opium-type drugs, morphine and diluted, and then he received the anesthesia cocktail prior to his biopsy procedure.
Do you recall what the drugs were in
Well,
that anesthesia?
propanol, fentanyl, and I can't recall the four, anyways, the standard anesthesia for a procedure, an endoscopy procedure like that.
Does the drug Versed have any
Versed,
significance
yes,
to
I
your...
believe you're right. Yeah, that's the third one of the cocktail.
Doctor, if you were shown a timeline of events of Mr. Reed's stay at the hospital before September 21st, could you walk the jury through when Mr. Reed received what medication?
Sure.
Your Honor, permission to display a demonstrative for the expert?
Any objection at this point? Okay. Proceed.
Well, when he was admitted, I think he was first started on Dilaudid, and that was not taking care of his pain, and then he was given morphine, and then I think that was changed to the patient-administered analgesia that Dr. Reisinger talked about.
Dr. Morrison, how long was the patient on morphine and Dilaudid?
Well, I think he was on the 17th, 18th, he was 19th, 20th, his whole hospitalization.
Please mark those. Thank you. No. In regards to the fentanyl, Versed, and propofol, we heard here the day that he received those at approximately 2 o'clock on the 19th. Is that conclusion the same that you made?
Yes.
And could we indicate that that's at 2 p.m., please?
Approximately, yes. I agree with that.
You heard Dr. Reisinger say that those prescription medications have a lingering effect. Can you speak to that lingering effect for the jury?
Yes,
Explain that to us.
generally people have something like that. It's 24 hours. Don't drive a car. Don't do anything important for the next 24 hours.
And why is that, doctor?
Well, you're just mentally impaired. You're sort of drunk, drowsy, might be confused.
Dr. Morrison, when would 24 hours after the administration of the fentanyl, Versed, and propofol be in regards to Mr. Reed's hospitalization?
Well, from 2 o'clock one afternoon to 2 o'clock the next afternoon.
So from 2 o'clock on the 19th until 2 o'clock on the 20th?
Yes, that would be 24 hours.
Could we please indicate that? Does that look like an accurate representation of Mr. Reed's prescription drugs during his hospitalization, doctor?
Yeah. Yes.
Your Honor, we ask that this be marked as Exhibit 39 and we offer it into the record for demonstrative purposes.
Any objection? Received for demonstrative purposes.
Finally, Dr. Morrison, I'd like to talk about the effect of all 5 of these drugs in your system on a person's ability to cognitively process things. But could you please tell the members of this jury, what would having all 5 of these drugs in your system do to a person's ability to think about what they're doing?
Well, in my opinion, in a patient like Mr. Reed, who had never been exposed to narcotics before, we use the term he's naive to narcotics. And so I believe they would have a tremendous effect on his ability to reason and function and carry on, if you will, normal business activities.
Would these drugs affect any person that way?
Well, I think somebody who is a chronic user over a period of years of narcotics, they can take more and more drugs before it affects them. But I don't believe he was exposed to any narcotics until the day he was admitted, and then he had to get stronger and stronger medication to control his pain.
Dr. Morrison, tell us, how would an unhealthy person metabolize these types of drugs?
Well, the primary source of metabolism for a normal healthy person is the liver and the kidney.
How would that be different from Mr. Reed's case?
Well, Mr. Reed's lab studies and his x-ray studies and then finally his biopsy studies would show that he probably had extensive replacement of his liver by his malignant tumor, and then his kidneys were starting to fail.
Would having failing kidneys and a malignant tumor on your liver affect your body's ability to pass the prescription drugs that he was given?
It certainly would.
Doctor, what's your conclusion as to Mr. Reed's mental status on September 20th of 2015?
I would think it would be very confused, disoriented, and certainly wouldn't want to be doing anything very important.
And is that conclusion based upon the best practices in your field and a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
May I proceed?
Please do.
Doctor, good afternoon. I'd like to visit with you some about the things you just discussed on your direct examination. First, I want to understand what you do for a living. Now, you are a treating emergency physician,
That's correct.
and you also hire yourself out as an expert witness.
I do that, yes.
And that's just like this case. You're an expert witness.
Yes.
So that's, just to be clear, you didn't treat Jimmy Reed in the hospital.
I did not treat Mr. Reed.
In fact, you never saw Jimmy Reed in person.
That's correct.
Now, you've done about 40 to 50 cases like this, isn't that true?
Over my career, yes.
In fact, you can't even remember the specific number of them.
No.
Now, you've been hired today by plaintiff's counsel, right?
Yes.
And that means they're paying you for your work here.
They're paying me for my time that I'm taking away from my practice, yes, sir.
Right. And as a part of that, it's actually true that this isn't the first time you've worked with plaintiff's counsel, is it?
I'd have to check my records on that, but
If I told you this was the 6th time that these plaintiff's counsels have hired you, would that surprise you?
no.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the advertisements you have for your witness business. Your Honor, I ask at this time to publish these to the jury in a large form. They're already in evidence as Exhibit 13.
No objection, Your Honor.
Received.
Look at the
Permission
front.
granted.
Look at the front page here, Doctor. This is your website, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It's got your name at the top.
That's my name.
And if we zoom into that middle quote, it says, Dr. Eddie Morrison, a medical expert witness with proven results, right?
That's what that says, yes.
And that's your website.
It is my website.
So let's look at the picture there. Zoom in on that. It's a courtroom scene, isn't it? It's a gavel at a judge's bench.
It is a gavel.
There's no medical photo on the front page.
No.
Now let's look at page 2. Now, Doctor, the bottom quote there, this was written by plaintiff's colleague, the other counsel that hired you, Cody Hill, isn't that right?
It says Mr. Hill, Texas attorney.
And it's a quote, and it says, Dr. Morrison has testified in 5 of my cases, and he does an excellent job explaining the issues to the jury. He reliably delivers big jury verdicts. I read that correct?
You're a very good reader, yes, sir.
Thank you. And Doctor, I'd like to visit with you a little bit about this case. Now, you were here in the courtroom when I discussed this case with the plaintiff, right?
Yes, it was.
And you heard what the value of the hippodrome was.
Yes.
We heard what the value of 51% of the hippodrome was.
Yes.
And Doctor, I think we can both agree if we saw $1.275 million on the ground, we'd both bend over to pick it up.
I would, yes.
Might be a big jury verdict.
Yes.
Let's look at the big quote up there, about at the middle of the page. Starting with the word let. It says, let Dr. Eddie Morrison be the right medical expert witness for you and get the winning results you desire. Well, let's be clear. The plaintiff desires to have the gift given to Ms. Wilson undone. Isn't that your understanding?
Objection, Your Honor. This witness lacks personal knowledge to know what the plaintiff desires.
Your Honor, if I may. The witness, I've simply asked the witness if he understands the claim for which he's been brought in to testify. That is, here, they're seeking to undo the inter vivos gift.
As to the phrase, you can rephrase your question more accurately, state what you just told me you were asking.
Yes, Your Honor.
So the objection sustained.
Doctor, I'll rephrase. Today, the plaintiff is seeking to have the inter vivos gift given to Ms. Wilson returned to the estate of Jimmy Reed. Isn't that true?
Can you explain inter vivos?
It means given during the life of someone, not a will.
Okay.
You'd agree that's the purpose of this litigation?
Well, I was asked to review the chart to testify on his mental capabilities
I
on the
understand.
day he made the decision.
Doctor, the question is, though, do you understand that they're trying to claim that he didn't have the capacity to make this inter vivos gift.
Yes, Your Honor, you can explain it a lot better. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, then I'd like to visit with you about the work you did in this case. Now, we've already discussed you didn't see Jimmy Reed, but I also want to ask, you never actually reached out to Dr. Reisinger, did you?
No,
You didn't reach out to any other physicians that treated Jimmy Reed?
no,
You didn't reach out to any of the nurses who worked the floor?
no,
You also didn't reach out to his family?
no,
You didn't reach out to Miss Wilson?
no,
In fact, you never picked up the phone to interview anyone?
no.
All you relied on were the medical records.
That's correct.
Now, you mentioned on your direct that these prescription drugs can have an impact on a patient, right?
Yes,
Especially the anesthetics, they can have an impact on one's cognitive abilities.
yes,
And in fact, we talked about this duration between 2 p.m. and 2 p.m. On the 19th and the 20th of September 2015. You remember that?
yes,
And it was shaded in a darker purple, but in fact, we're aware, as you heard Dr. Reisinger say, the patient was awake at 7:45 p.m., right?
he was reported to be awake.
And it was reported in the notes that you relied on.
Yes,
You have no reason to question the veracity or the truthfulness of those notes, do you?
I do not.
Doctor, you would agree with me that while Jimmy Reed may have displayed higher BUN levels in his blood, it's still possible, in fact, that he did not suffer delirium, right?
It's possible, but not likely. In my opinion, he did.
It's also possible that the sepsis did not cause any cognitive impact.
Highly unlikely, but possible.
Possible. And doctor, finally, it is possible that at the end of that 24-hour mark where the anesthesiology drugs would have been wearing off, he wouldn't have been suffering from any cognitive impact.
Well, he was already on 2 big narcotics anyway, which can impair cognitive ability anyway.
And you'd agree it's possible that even taking all 5 of those into account, he may not have suffered any cognitive impact.
I would say he suffered cognitive impact,
Certainly,
in my opinion.
yes, doctor. Well, you would agree with me that it could be possible that he didn't, regardless of that
It's
it's your belief.
possible, but highly unlikely, in my opinion.
Thank you, doctor. Pass the witness.
No redirect, Your Honor. We just ask that the witness be allowed to step down.
All right, please step down, doctor. Thank you. Next witness.
With that, Your Honor, the plaintiff's arrest its case in chief.
All right, at this time, any motions from the defendant?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we'd like to be heard outside the presence of the jury.
Okay,
Your Honor, at this time, we ask that the court enter judgment as a matter of law pursuant to Rule 50 of the Federal Rule of Civil Procedure. We ask that the court withhold the question of whether Jimmy Reed had the capacity or the intent to give an inter vivos gift to Miss Wilson on September 20th, 2015. Now, the plaintiff has the burden of proof, and as the court is well aware, that burden is that even viewing the evidence in the light most favorable to the non-moving party, he had to bring enough evidence here to convince a reasonable juror that, in fact, Mr. Reed did not have that mental capacity. Now, today we have heard from one physician who actually treated Mr. Reed who said that he did have the mental capacity, and a consultant who only looked at the records which indicated that he did have a mental capacity and somehow reached an opposite conclusion. That is not reaching a preponderance of the evidence, Your Honor, and I ask for that reason that this court enter judgment as a matter of law in favor of Miss Wilson.
response, counselor?
Yes, Your Honor. According to Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 50, assuming the evidence in the light most favorable to the non-movement party, which is the plaintiff, a reasonable juror could find, Your Honor, that enough evidence has been laid to find in favor of Ms. Ashbrook. Specifically, Your Honor, in fact, Dr. Reisinger has been called, did take the stand, and he did not say that Mr. Reed had the mental capacity on September 20th. In fact, what we found out through his own testimony is that he had deferred medical treatment discussions with the decedent because he did not feel that the decedent was himself due to the drugs he was taking. Furthermore, Your Honor, we've seen the evidence and heard the testimony of an expert witness and the decedent's family member who described him as being mentally unfit, incapable of making his own decisions.
Motion denied. Court will be in recess for 10 minutes.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
So I'll be seated, please. All right, who'll be the first witness for the defense?
Miss Haley Wilson will, Your Honor.
All right, come around. Let's proceed.
Miss Wilson, will you introduce yourself to our jury?
Hello, my name is Haley Nicole Wilson.
Miss Wilson, what do you do for a living?
I'm a small business owner here in town. I own the My Style Salon up on New Road.
All right, and I want to just cut to the chase here. Why are we here today?
We're here because Jimmy, who was my long-term boyfriend and friend, wanted me to have the Hippodrome Theater before he died. And his sister, Taylor, doesn't want that.
Okay, I want to talk some more about that, but first let's talk about you and Jimmy's relationship.
Sure.
When did you meet Jimmy?
Oh gosh, we met back in 2005. We were introduced by a mutual friend, Cameron, who was another owner in the Hippodrome.
All right. Tell us about your meeting. Where'd y'all meet?
We were set up on a blind date by Cameron, and I got there a little bit early, and so I had ordered a drink, and I remember turning around and seeing Jimmy for the first time, and he's very, very tall, so you could definitely notice him when he would walk in a room, and I know this sounds really corny, but it was love at first sight. We just hit it off, and I think he asked me something like, what was I drinking? And he would have the same thing. He was always using movie quotes and one-liners like that.
So you started dating in 2005. Did you pretty much keep dating from that point?
Yes, we dated from 2005 until, it was almost 10 years, so 2014.
All right. Over the course of those years, did y'all ever have any trips anywhere?
Yes, we took a lot of trips. We would go to New Orleans, but I would say definitely our favorite place that we went to was Paris.
Why don't you tell the jury a little bit about that trip to Paris?
Sure. Jimmy wanted to do something special to celebrate. I think it was the 1 year the Hippodrome was up and running and had been really successful, and we had been all, Taylor included, working really hard to get it going. So we wanted to just take a week and get away, and so we went to Paris and stayed at this amazing hotel and ate at the cafes and went to museums and took a tour. It was wonderful.
All right. You mentioned the Hippodrome. What's the Hippodrome?
Oh, the Hippodrome is the movie theater. The picture was up earlier.
I think we'll try to pull that one back up. What's in this picture here? Can you see it? You've got a screen here too.
Oh, sure. That's a picture of me and Jimmy. As you can tell, he's really, really tall, or was really tall.
Now, I want to ask about your interaction with the Hippodrome. Did you ever work there or anything like that?
Not officially, but unofficially, yes. Every day when when Jimmy first started working there, when they bought it, it was dilapidated. I mean, there was a lot of work to be done, so it was kind of all hands on deck. So when I would close up my salon for the evening, I would go over there and help out any way I could.
Now, did you feel like you were a part of Jimmy's family?
Yes, very much so.
Did you get to know his family members?
Yes. I consider Taylor like a sister.
How about Taylor's kids? Did you meet them?
Yes, I was very close with her children. Her daughter would come to the salon all of the time, and we would, give her fancy braids and things. She loved doing that. And Jimmy and I would take her kids out, Parker and Penelope, and take them, just different places in Waco.
All right. Now, Ms. Wilson, I do need to ask about the other side of the coin. And you've been here throughout trial. Can you tell us about the struggles that you and Jimmy had in your relationship?
Sure. Well, Jimmy and I were just friends when he passed away. We had been together for 9 years, and our relationship ended because he had infidelity issues, and I couldn't have that in my life anymore, so we broke up.
And I want to ask, and I'm not trying to pry, but was that the first time you had caught him cheating on you?
No, it was the second time.
Did you break up the first time?
No.
Why did you choose, you said it was too much at that point. Why did you choose to break up in 2014?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
What's the relevance of this?
Yes, Your Honor. She's taking, as we know, she's been the recipient of the Inter Vivos gift. This was after the breakup. Now, Your Honor, it goes to show that, and it established in a line of testimony that, in fact, once they broke up, they still maintained a relationship. And I want to make sure the jury is clear that they had that relationship and that they know she, in fact,
Overruled.
maintained it.
Let's proceed.
Now, Ms. Wilson, you said you broke up in 2014. Why was that?
I caught Jimmy cheating on me.
And at that point, you did not want to stay with him?
Correct.
Does that mean that Jimmy quit pursuing you after that?
Objection, Your Honor, leading question.
Rephrased.
Did Jimmy continue to contact you after that?
Yes, he did. I honestly don't think we ever stopped loving each other. He texted me almost every other day, told me that he loved me, and I think he did want to get back together. For the first 2 months, I didn't respond to any of his text messages. It was still too fresh and painful, but eventually he wore me down, and I responded, and we kind of took up a friendship, and we would go to lunch and see each other almost every week.
And did you ever go to the Hippodrome together?
Yes, all the time.
What'd you do while you were there?
We'll watch movies, of course.
Any favorites of Jimmy's that you remember?
Yes, Jimmy's favorite movie was Casablanca.
Okay, so I want to talk about today's case and the gift that he gave you on September 20th. Do you remember that day?
Yes.
Why don't you tell the jury what happened that day?
Well, I had heard that Jimmy was sick. I didn't know how sick he was. And Taylor called me and told me that he was in the hospital and that I needed to come up and see him. And so I did. And when I walked into the room, he made another funny joke about a movie line, something to the extent of, today is the luckiest day, something like that. I'm the luckiest man on earth. And I was surprised when I saw him. I didn't realize that he was so sick. And I went over and held his hand, and we embraced, and we just talked a lot about life and our relationship and all of the wonderful memories we had shared.
Throughout that time, did you doubt Jimmy's ability to understand who you were?
No, not at all.
Was he able to maintain conversation with you?
Yes, he was making funny jokes, just, typical Jimmy. Obviously he was sick, he was in the hospital, but we probably talked for, almost an hour that day.
Was it unusual for him to reference movies or quote movies with you?
No, not at all. He would do that all the time.
All right, so let's talk about what happened at the end of your hour that you spent with Jimmy there at the hospital. Remember
Sure.
that?
Yes.
Tell the jury what happened.
Basically, we were talking, and I think Jimmy probably felt, deep down in his heart, guilty about what had happened.
Objection, Your Honor. The witness is speculating to the state of mind of a third party.
If I may, Your Honor.
Yes.
She's giving testimony as to what she observed there. She said she was with him, and she's giving her opinion as a lay witness with someone she knew very well what was happening.
Brief response, Your Honor. The witness just said, I think he felt very guilty. There's been no foundation laid as to how this lay witness can actually rationally perceive he felt guilt in his mind.
I overrule that objection. Most of us, I think, as a lay witness, perceive we're able to express what we perceive about another person.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Wilson, you can continue. You were saying something about Jimmy and how he felt.
Yes, I mean, I knew Jimmy very well, almost 10 years, and he expressed some remorse about some of the things that had happened. He didn't come out and say, sorry, I cheated on you, but they were, words to that extent. And then he reached over on the table next to his bed, and I think there was some medical records there, and he took a pen and he wrote a note and folded it up and gave it to me.
All right, so what did you do with the note?
Well, he told me to look at it, and I did.
All right, would you recognize that note if I showed it to you today?
I'm sure I would.
Your Honor, at this time I ask to publish to the jury, or actually I'd like to offer it into evidence first. It's a note that the witness just testified about that she saw on September 20th, 2015.
Your Honor, the proper foundation has not been laid for this document to be entered into evidence.
I sustain it.
Yes, Your Honor. May I approach the witness?
Yes.
Permission to see the document?
It's Exhibit 1.
Thank you.
Yep, and it's in its entirety, front and back.
Thank you.
Now, may I approach the court with a copy?
I don't need a copy.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. Wilson, I've handed you Exhibit 1 for the record. You see what it is?
Yes, sir.
Can you see the other side as well?
Yes.
Without discussing the contents, what is it that I've handed you?
This is the note that I was just talking about that Jimmy gave me right before he passed away.
And is this the original?
It looks like it, yes.
Does it appear to have been altered in any way since you've seen it?
No.
Same note you were just discussing on September 20th.
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we offer Exhibit 1 into evidence.
No objections, Your Honor.
Proceed.
May we publish it to the jury?
Yes.
Now, we're looking at the front page, and you have a visual there. Can you tell us, what is that?
Yes, it's, well, this is the piece of paper that he picked up that was by the side of, by the side of his bed to
All
write
right.
on.
And we'll flip to this other side. And we've zoomed in here on the text. Now, first, can you just read it to us?
Sure. It says, Haley will always have Paris. I give you all of my shares of stock in the Hippodrome, JSR, which are his initials, James Shane Reed, 9/20/15.
Okay. So let's first turn your attention here to your name. Do you
Yes.
notice anything?
It's misspelled.
Okay. Does that mean anything significant to you?
Not really. I think, he was scribbling it.
Okay.
I didn't take offense to it.
All right. So he said, we'll always have Paris. What did you take that to mean?
Well, it's a famous line from our favorite movie, Casablanca.
All right. And now let's look at the second sentence. You said, it says, I give you all of my shares in the Hippodrome. You read that, how do you feel?
Shocked?
Did you tell Jimmy that?
Yes, I said I can't accept this.
How did he respond?
He was adamant. He said, I want you to have this. I love
Objection,
you.
Your Honor. Under 601 of the Dead Man's Rule, this is inadmissible testimony.
May I be heard, Your Honor? Otherwise, oral statements are inadmissible if the decedent doesn't have it corroborated. But here, Your Honor, we have the note in which he says, I give you all of my shares. So the statement, I want you to have it, is in fact corroborated exactly by this note, which the person signed.
Well, I'm going to overrule your objection, but you both waived the dead man statute a long time ago because of different testimony you brought in about what the deceased said and didn't, and who said what, and the administrator. So the dead man statute's been gone a long time in this case. Let's proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. And Ms. Wilson, if you could finish up there, you were saying what he said to you, once you told him this shocked you.
Right. I said I can't accept it. This is too much. And he said, babe, I want you to have this. You were a part of the Hippodrome from the very beginning. I love you. I've always loved you. Let me do this for you.
What'd you do then?
I folded it up and put it in my purse, and I was in shock. Didn't honestly think about it that much more. I was more focused on spending more time with Jimmy.
Now, after he had handed you the note, you put it in your purse. What happened then?
That day in the hospital, we spoke for probably another 10 or 15 minutes, I would say. And then I left, and that was the last time I saw him.
All right, well, at that moment, did you feel the need to go down to the Hippodrome and tell everyone that Jimmy had given you the gift?
No.
Did you feel the need to confront the plaintiff about that fact?
No, Taylor and I were close friends. Why would I confront her?
I want to ask then about what happened the next day. Did you contact Mr. Reed?
Did I?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
How did you do that?
Well, we would text message.
Did you send him a text that day?
I did.
Do you remember the date?
Oh, gosh, I think it might have been the next day.
Would it be September 21st then?
That would be right. Correct.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Well, it's counsel seen your exhibit. Always make sure.
It's Exhibit 23.
Thank you.
And I'm holding. And Ms. Wilson, I've just handed you Exhibit 23. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And without discussing the contents, what is it you're looking at?
This is a printout of a text message chain between me and Jimmy.
All right, and was it captured in any certain form?
It looks kind of like a screenshot.
All right. Now, does it appear to have been altered in any way since you took that?
No.
Does it appear to accurately represent the text messages sent between you and Mr. Reed?
Well, yes.
All right. What's the, I want to ask also, did you know Jimmy Reed's phone number?
Of course.
And would that have been a phone number you had saved in your phone?
Right. I have it saved as Jimmy.
All right. Your Honor, at this time we offer what's been previously marked as Exhibit 23 into evidence with the court's prior ruling that in fact AT&T has turned over phone records indicating that the amount of text messages on that document were in fact sent on that date at the exact same time.
Okay, will be heard.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
How is it hearsay?
Your Honor, these are out-of-court statements being offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted, both from this witness, Ms. Wilson, and also from the number associated with Jimmy Wilson. Both sets of statements are out of court and being offered to prove the truth of the matter they assert.
Your Honor, if I need to be heard before your ruling?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Yes, Your Honor. So the statements contained within that screenshot actually show the then existing state of mind of the declarant. The declarant at that time was Mr. Jimmy Reed, and assuming we're outside the presence of the jury, if I may proffer, the statement from Ms. Wilson will say, "I can't believe what you've done for me," and then the decedent responds with a movie quote, which she will testify that she understands. It's the then existing state of mind, and it shows the
I'm
intent.
going to allow it under existing state of mind.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Wilson, Your Honor, just for the record, is it in evidence?
I'm going to allow it, and it's invented into evidence
Yes, Your
for
Honor.
that purpose only.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. Wilson, and I'll ask my co-counsel to enlarge the document. If we're looking at it here, what'd you say to Jimmy that morning?
Well, first I asked him, "How are you feeling?" And then I wrote, "I still can't believe what you did for me."
And what's the item that's right under that message?
He responded back and said, "Here's looking at you, kid."
Now, what does that mean to you?
It's another line from one of our favorite movies, and it was basically, I took it to mean he's saying, "You're welcome. Here's looking at you, kid."
And is there a read receipt on the timing there?
Yes, it says read at 6:23 a.m., right after I sent it.
Your Honor, at this time I'm going to object and ask it be heard outside the presence of the jury.
All right?
Your Honor, you admitted this document on the condition that the statements contained therein would fall under the 8033 exception, that the statement from Mr. Reed would show his then existing state of mind. However, opposing counsel's question only asked what she interpreted this statement to mean, and they're taking Ms. Wilson's interpretation of what this statement means to somehow project a state of mind on Mr. Reed. This statement by itself does not convey his state of mind and therefore does not fall under the 8033 exception, and this document should be inadmissible.
Well, overrule.
Yes, Your Honor. And we'll take that down. May I retrieve the document, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Now, Ms. Wilson, after you'd seen this, did you have a chance to see Jimmy again? Did you intend to go back and see him?
Yes.
Thank you. Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Wilson, I wrote down a phrase from your direct examination where you said you didn't realize how sick Mr. Reed was when you went to see him. Is that right?
Yes.
But just to be clear, you had been contacted by his sister, Miss Ashbrook.
Yes, Taylor was the one that told me he was in the hospital.
In fact, you had been contacted 3 days prior.
I think that's right.
And she told you that, well, Mr. Reed, he had a case of terminal pancreatic cancer. Isn't that right?
I remember Taylor calling me and telling me he was in the hospital.
But it's your testimony here today that she didn't tell you that he had terminal pancreatic cancer?
I mean, I believe I understood that at the time, yes.
So in fact, you knew he was dying.
Well, no, not necessarily.
You didn't understand that terminal pancreatic cancer meant he was dying of pancreatic cancer.
I understood that he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I didn't know when exactly he was going to pass.
Nevertheless, when you arrived on September 20th, you actually you went to visit Mr. Reed.
Yes.
And you arrived before 9 o'clock.
I think I got there sometime between 8 and 9 that morning.
Sometime between 8 and 9, and you went into his room.
Yes.
So you were in his room by 9 o'clock.
Yes, I think that's fair to say.
All right, so when you entered this room at 9 o'clock, you actually, there was no one else in there, right?
Correct. Taylor and another lady were outside his room.
Well, you were aware who that other woman, you're now aware who that other woman was, right?
Correct.
That was Megan Wood, right?
Yes, I think that was Jimmy's then girlfriend.
Jimmy's girlfriend, correct?
Yes.
All right, so when you went into Mr. Reed's room, you noticed that he was hooked up to a lot of machinery.
Yes,
I mean, certainly you remember seeing Mr. Reed lying in that hospital bed, right?
of course.
He had an attachment on his finger for his heart monitoring, right?
I remember there being a pump.
And in fact, there was an IV bag, isn't that right?
Yes.
The IV bag, now, you're not a medical doctor, right?
No, I'm not.
But certainly you know what an IV does.
Correct.
It delivers medicine into him.
And fluids.
That's right, and fluids. So when you saw Mr. Reed lying there in the hospital bed, he didn't say anything to you.
When Jimmy was in the hospital bed?
Yes, when you saw Mr. Reed, when you initially entered, he didn't actually say anything to you, did he?
No, he did.
Well, he actually, you walked over to him and then he spoke to you. Isn't that correct?
Sorry, I'm not understanding the distinction.
When you walked into the room, you and Mr. Reed made eye contact.
Yes.
And when you made that eye contact, he didn't say hello, right?
I would think he probably did. I mean, he used a movie quote. He said,
Well-
"Today's the luckiest day of my life because you're here," something to that effect.
Specifically, ma'am, when you walked in and you made eye contact with him initially, he didn't say anything to you, did he?
He said, "Today's the luckiest day."
All right, ma'am. Now, you walked over to his hospital bed, right?
Right.
You picked up his hand, right?
Yes.
And then he said to you, "Today, I feel like I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth." Isn't that right?
Yes, you say it better than I do.
That's right. But he never actually acknowledged you by name when you entered his hospital room, correct?
I don't remember.
All right. Now, you recognize that "today I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth." That's a quote from a movie, right?
Yes.
I Googled it. It's Pride of the Yankees. Isn't that right?
Jimmy was the movie buff.
That's right. Jimmy often quoted old movies, right?
Yes, he did.
Now, at that point, he said another movie line to you, didn't he?
He did.
He said, "Miss Woodson, I think you're trying to seduce me, aren't you?" Did I remember that correctly?
Yes.
Now, that's another quote from a movie, The Graduate. Isn't that right?
Yes, I believe it's Mrs. Robinson in that movie.
Well, certainly, ma'am, you don't remember at any point, after that, you started talking with him about different topics. Isn't that right?
Yes.
You talked about the medicine he was on?
We mentioned it, or he mentioned it briefly, but he said that he didn't have any, right now he was locked out.
Thank you for that answer, but my question's much simpler than that. You talked about the medicine he was taking.
Right, I wanted to make sure he wasn't in any pain.
You talked about his illness, right?
A little bit. He didn't really want to talk too much about that, though.
And you talked about the procedures he had undergone at the hospital.
I don't really remember that.
All right, Ms. Wilson. Well, certainly you do remember asking him about his pain, correct?
Yes,
And when you asked him about his pain, you asked him if he was in a lot of pain. Isn't that right?
I'm sure I did.
To which he said, yes, he was in a lot of pain.
He kind of made a joke of it and said, well, I've got my medicine here.
It's your testimony of the day he didn't say, yes, I'm in a lot of pain.
I think he did, but he sort of tried to play it off.
Well, I'm not asking whether or not he tried to play it off. I'm asking if he said, yes, I'm in a lot of pain, right?
Yes,
And in fact, he then told you that the doctors were helping him manage it, right?
well, yeah, that's right.
And he lifted up his hand, correct?
Yes,
And he showed you that he had a clicker in his hand, right?
yes,
And he told you this was how the doctors were managing his pain.
well, he said, I'm locked out. I can't use it or something.
Nevertheless, before he said that, he said, this is how the doctors are managing his pain.
Right.
And then he told you he was locked out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you don't know what that means.
It means that he couldn't get the pump going for more medicine.
But certainly you heard Dr. Reisinger on the stand today.
I did.
And Dr. Reisinger said that means he had taken so much of the medication, he was literally locked out for his own health, well-being. Correct?
I don't think that's what Dr. Reisinger said.
Okay, Ms. Wilson. Well, nevertheless, you then started talking about the Hippodrome.
Yeah.
And you started talking about Paris,
Yes.
because you two had gone to Paris.
Yes.
And then the conversation on the Hippodrome, it went back to the Hippodrome. Isn't that right?
Gosh, we talked about a lot of things.
In fact, you talked a lot about the Hippodrome on that day. Isn't that right?
We spent a lot of time there.
And
Yes.
that conversation lasted for 45 minutes.
Yes, I think I was there for about 45 minutes before we started talking about the Hippodrome.
And then I'm sorry, ma'am, it's your testimony here today that you were there for 45 minutes before you started talking about the Hippodrome?
I mean, when the conversation about him giving me the Hippodrome.
Well, I'm not asking about when he wrote the note, ma'am. I'm asking about when you two talked about the Hippodrome and your time there.
I
And
see.
that was within the 45-minute period you spent talking with him face to face. Isn't that right?
Yes, yes. I
No.
understand your question.
Now, in fact, at that 45-minute mark, you stood up.
Yes.
You were ready to leave.
I don't know. I don't think so.
Well, nevertheless, Mr. Reed, as you testified on direct examination, he reached across himself, right?
Right.
Ripped off a piece of paper from some medical records, correct?
Correct.
He didn't look to see what those medical records said, if they were important.
I don't think he looked.
He just ripped it off.
He took it from a pad of records that were on the side of his bed.
And then he turned it around and wrote something on the back.
Correct.
Now, he folded that note up and he gave it to you.
Correct.
And you read that note.
He asked me to open it and read it.
And you were in shock.
I was.
Because you had never talked about owning the Hippodrome.
Correct.
That came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I was shocked.
That didn't make any sense. Correct?
Well, I think it made a lot of sense what he said.
Nevertheless, based on all your interactions with him before, it didn't make any sense for him to just give you the Hippodrome.
I disagree.
Well, nevertheless, ma'am, like you said, you'd never talked about owning a share in the Hippodrome,
You're right.
let alone running the Hippodrome.
Right.
So when he gave it to you, you told him it was a mistake. Isn't that right?
I said, I don't feel right about taking it.
Specifically, ma'am, you told him it was a mistake. Isn't that right?
Yes.
You told him not to do it. Isn't that
Yes.
correct? But
Yes.
it's your testimony here today. He said, babe, don't worry about it. Is that a yes, ma'am?
That's what he said.
And so you took it and you folded it up and you put it in your purse.
I did what he asked me to do, yes.
Now, just to be clear, ma'am, when you left the hospital room that day, you felt uneasy about what he had done.
I was in shock.
And specifically, you were worried about it.
I don't think I was worried about it.
Well, ma'am, you were so worried about it, you actually texted him the next day to confirm that he intended to give you the gift.
No, that wasn't the way that I intended that text message to me.
So it's your testimony here today that you didn't actually give him that note in order to, excuse me, it's your testimony you didn't actually text him on September 21st in order to confirm that he meant to give you the Hippodrome?
That's right. I texted him and said, "How are you feeling? I still can't believe what you did. Sort of, thank you."
All right, ma'am. And you asked him, how are you feeling in that text message?
I did.
And he said nothing to that question. Right?
He just wrote back, "Here's looking at you, kid."
But in fact, you asked him how he was feeling, and he never answered you.
The only thing he wrote back was, "Here's looking at you, kid."
My question's a lot simpler than that, ma'am. You asked him how he was feeling, and he never answered that question. Isn't that right, ma'am?
I felt like he had by what he said.
Can we pull up 23, please? We're going to pull it up just
Sure.
so we can all be sure. Ma'am, you asked him how he was feeling, right?
Correct.
He never answered how he was feeling. Isn't that right?
He wrote back, "Here's looking at you, kid."
Which, for you, was an explanation of how this man with terminal pancreatic cancer, that was an explanation of how he was feeling, Miss Wilson?
I can't speak for what he was feeling.
Nevertheless, ma'am, you told him you'd come see him.
Yes,
You asked, are you still there?
yes,
He said, Jimmy.
yes.
He didn't reply.
No.
He didn't respond. So you rushed to the hospital.
No.
You didn't go to the hospital.
He passed before I was able to go back.
It's your testimony that he passed on September 21st?
No, he passed before I went back to the hospital.
So you couldn't go back to the hospital on September 21st. That's your testimony.
Is this the 21st or the 22nd?
Yes, ma'am, this was the day after you went to visit him. You remember that, right?
Sure, the 21st.
And you couldn't, your testimony today is you couldn't go back to the hospital on the 21st.
I suppose I could have.
But you didn't.
I did not, no.
What you did do was take a screenshot of this picture, right?
I believe so, yes.
And you sent a screenshot of this picture to the vice president of the Hippodrome. Isn't that right?
Our friend, Cameron, yes.
And you sent it to the vice president of the Hippodrome in order to establish a record. Isn't that right?
No.
Well, just to be clear, when you decided to let the note you had be known, you took it to the same person you sent the screenshot to, right?
Right, Cameron, he was the other owner, well, and Taylor too, but of the Hippodrome.
But you didn't take it to Ms. Ashbrook, correct?
I don't believe she was working there at the time, so no.
It's your testimony Ms. Ashbrook wasn't working at the Hippodrome?
I think she had already moved on. I don't think she was there.
Just to be clear, Ms. Wilson, you took it to Cameron Jordan, the same person you sent this screenshot to on September 21st, right?
Correct.
And he's the one that gave you the $1 million shares, correct?
Jimmy gave me the $1 million shares.
Nevertheless, ma'am, after Mr. Reed had passed away, it was actually Cameron Jordan that processed your $1 million shares being transferred to your name, correct?
51% of the shares were transferred to my name.
And you understand the value of those 51% of those shares to be over $1 million, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
May I proceed?
Please do.
Ms. Wilson, I want to clarify some things here. Now, when you walked into the room and you made eye contact with Jimmy Reed, did you have any doubts that he recognized you?
No.
When he said that movie line about being the luckiest guy on the planet, do you think he knew who he was talking to?
Yes.
Did you
Me.
have any doubt? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I said, it's okay. Yes, me.
And throughout any time in that hour, did you have a doubt as to whether he knew who he was talking to?
I can tell you with 100% certainty he knew who he was talking to.
What's your objection?
Honor. Sorry, technology. Objection, Your Honor. This witness is speaking to the state of mind of a third person. She just said, I can tell you with 100% certainty that he knew who he was talking to. Your Honor, this witness cannot possibly speak to the
I'll
state.
sustain this, that question, that answer. Jury disregard that answer.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
I've been instructed to disregard it. It's in the record. It won't be stricken from the record.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Wilson, without talking about what you think Jimmy was thinking, just tell this jury, did you have any doubt in your mind about whether he thought he knew he was talking to you?
I did not have any doubt in my mind.
Thank you. Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Anything further? No, Your Honor. All right, you may step down. Who'll be the defense next witness?
Actually, Your Honor, before we make that decision, do you mind if I inquire with the timekeeper as to where I am?
Certainly.
Great. All right, Your Honor, we're ready to proceed. At this time, we'd like to call Dr. Donnie Reisinger back to the stand. Reisinger, excuse me.
Rising. Please proceed.
Dr. Reisinger, I know you've already introduced yourself to the jury, so why don't we go ahead and pick up then. We've already talked about your credentials. Let's pick up with your time with Jimmy Reed. Do you remember when Jimmy Reed came into the hospital?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell the jury about when that was?
It was on the 15th. I don't remember the exact time. I'm sure it's a part of the hospital record.
And Your Honor, at this time I ask permission to approach the witness.
Granted.
Showing opposing counsel an excerpt of Exhibit 4, the nurse's notes. It goes from page 33 of 90 to 42 of 90. It's unaltered in this version. This is for my record. Does the bench require a copy, Your Honor?
No.
I've handed you Exhibit 4, Doctor. You recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And does this document appear fair and accurate?
Are we talking about the first page or all of it?
If you just briefly flip through it and let us know.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Opposing counsel's seeking to only enter a portion of the exhibit. We just ask he enter the entire exhibit if he's going to enter Exhibit 4.
Well, I'll have to hear something else. At this point, that objection's overruled. I mean, it's my understanding these are all business records of the hospital.
They are, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. However, there's hearsay within the hearsay within these documents.
Well, then you better tell me which one's your objection to about the hearsay within the hearsay. I understand that objection, but that's the first time I've heard you say anything about it. So what pages are you saying that I need to look at?
Yes, Your Honor. If I can only confer what pages he's actually entering, which is why I asked that he enter the entire document.
Well, Your Honor, if the court prefers, I'm happy to enter the entire document. It does have the business record exception affidavit attached
Well,
there,
that doesn't cure the hearsay within the hearsay objection that I've just heard
Yes,
for the
Your Honor.
first time. So you know which pages within this that you wish to.
Your Honor, it hasn't been clarified whether or not he's bringing in consecutive pages, whether or not he's just picked a random amount of pages.
My question is, Counselor, you have a copy of the entire exhibit, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, now you tell me what pages of that entire exhibit you are objecting to for hearsay within hearsay.
Yes, Your Honor. An example can be found on page 30.
I don't need an example, Counselor. I need the number of pages and I'll look at it.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Page 38.
Is that the only one?
Yes, Your Honor. This is just an example.
Okay, no, that's not, I'm trying to find out what pages within this multi-page exhibit you object to based upon hearsay within hearsay. You've told me page 38. I did not ask you for an illustration because I'm going to rule on all of them.
Yes, Your Honor. briefly 1 second to gather all the hearsay within hearsay.
Your Honor, may I?
No, hold on, I want to get this.
Yes, Your
Let's
Honor.
get to this.
Furthermore, Your Honor, on page 47,
Okay,
page 50, page 54, page 58, Your Honor.
now then, Counselor, are any of those pages contained within this exhibit?
One, Your Honor, and I would like to be heard on that matter.
Well, can I see what pages are you got in this group?
It's page, yes, Your Honor, we're going through page 33 to 42, and I believe within that segment, the only one that opposing counsel has referenced is 38, and I too
Okay.
have that identified.
All right, you had an extra copy.
I
Let
do,
me
Your
see
Honor.
that, and then I can-
Would Your Honor prefer the whole exhibit or page
No,
30?
I'd like to see the one we got an objection to.
Yes, Your Honor. And I'll show opposing counsel.
We're good.
Okay. Page 38, Your Honor.
Now, what part of 38 are you objecting to?
Yes, Your Honor, there are two statements contained, there are two sections. First of all, Your Honor, there's a general section that's below the block quotes on the first half. And the second statement, Your Honor, is contained in the middle of the page at nursing intervention.
Well, I'm having a hard time. Do y'all have this on the, you gonna call this one up or can't
We
you?
do, Your Honor. I'm happy to pull it up.
Okay, pull it up, page 38.
And I'll ask my co-counsel to zoom in on the first portion that counsel's identified.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to find, because I'm not able to follow it that quickly. Okay. All right, why is that not hearsay within hearsay, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Those statements are made by family members to medical professionals, both of whom, first, family members of Jimmy Reed, and the medical professionals are those treating Jimmy Reed. For that reason, they are statements made for the purpose of a medical diagnosis. And then, obviously, the entirety of this recording is covered under the business record exception.
May I be heard, Your Honor, on the medical diagnosis exception argument?
Yes?
Your Honor, that is in fact not how the Federal Rules of Evidence treats medical diagnosis. The Federal Rules of Evidence under 803 allows for statements that a patient makes to a doctor for the purpose of medical diagnosis to be admissible under the hearsay rule. This, Your Honor, is not a statement, and family member statements would not fall under that exception.
Doctor, do you consider this a statement of any kind?
I'm sorry, Judge, could you rephrase that?
Did you consider the patient's report from the patient's family? Would you have considered that at all in treating this patient?
Not actually.
Okay, sustained objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Now,
For
can we
purpose,
ask,
that is now redacted from the record.
and is the exhibit accepted between those pages otherwise?
Now, what was you had two objections.
Your Honor, with that redacted, I'll withdraw my second objection.
Okay. Redaction's done constructively. It's not in the record that the jury will see, and their jury's back in the box. Let's proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Riesinger, so you don't have that any longer, do you? Or you do? Okay, just making sure. So I've handed you those medical records there, Exhibit 4, and I'd like to ask you the dates about which Jimmy Reed was under your care. Now, he was brought in on the 17th, as that record reflects, correct?
Correct.
And you attended to him on that date?
Correct.
And was he exhibiting any pain at that time?
Yes. Now, these documents I have in front of me right now are all nurses' notes.
Right.
Okay. None of them are my notes.
Yes, sir. Yes, doctor. And I will point that distinction out, and we'll talk in more depth on those notes actually later. But I just want to clarify, was Jimmy Reed under pain when you first saw him?
Yes, he was.
And as his treating physician, what did you decide to do about that pain?
He was in so much pain that I thought the first order of business was to try to get his pain under control and then try to proceed with the usual diagnostic workup.
How did you decide to go ahead and get that pain under control?
We tried to get it under control with morphine first. With Dilaudid first.
All right.
And then that didn't control it. He kept having breakthrough pain.
All right.
And that's when we decided to put him on the patient control device with additional morphine.
All right. So he was put on those 2 pain medications. How, in your opinion, did those work on your patient?
Fairly well.
All right. And were there times when perhaps he might still have other pain?
Yes.
But let's ask this, doctor. Was that pain ever enough that you think your patient was suffering from delirium?
I personally never thought that he was delirious.
Was that because he wasn't exhibiting enough pain or for any reason?
For reasons that I was able to, in my opinion, communicate with him virtually throughout his hospital stay until toward the end of the stay.
All right. Now, opposing counsel has talked throughout his case about the different drugs that your patient was receiving for the purpose of his medical procedure. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes, I do.
And he was put on 3 other drugs for that procedure, right?
That's correct.
And off the top of your head, do you happen to remember those 3?
Versed, Profilol, and
Was it fentanyl?
fentanyl, right.
Now, those 3, let's just be specific here. Were those just used generally to treat his pain, or were they used for a more specific purpose?
Specific purpose of controlling the pain and the patient during the procedure.
All right. And about how long do these drugs live within the bloodstream after they're administered?
As previously stated, approximately 24 hours.
But, doctor, let me ask, would you be exhibiting the same reaction to the drug as soon as it's pushed in your IV as you would be at the end of that 24-hour spectrum?
You would be getting much more effect of it at the beginning of the institution of the medicine than you would. It would be playing out toward the end of it.
All right. And, doctor, as we know, different patients treat these drugs differently, right?
That's correct.
And, doctor, I want to ask then about your patient, Jimmy Reed, and how he received these drugs. Now, do you remember the time frame in which he received that procedure on the 19th?
I think we've gone through that timeline already, and I believe it was about 2 o'clock.
In the afternoon or the morning?
In the afternoon.
All right.
1,400 hours.
Okay. Now, do you remember whether your patient was awake shortly thereafter the procedure?
Well, to clarify a point, a lot of times that patients don't go completely asleep during these type of procedures. They are sedated and but never are made totally unconscious. So he may not have been totally unconscious during this procedure.
Thank you, doctor. Now I want to talk about some of the nurse's notes that you have in front of you. And let's clarify what these are. Could you tell the jury what nurse's notes are?
Well, nurse's notes are just what you stated. They are the notes regarding the patient throughout their stay. And the physicians and other staff members depend on these tremendously in the evaluation of the patient because they're there all the time and we're only there at intervals.
All right. So let's talk about some of the ones that we have for your patient, Jimmy Reed. If I could point your attention to the first page I've handed you, page 33 of Exhibit 4. And I'll ask that my co-counsel enlarge the portion that says physical assessment. Doctor, can you see that blown up on your computer?
Yes, I can.
All right, can you read the date and the time allowed for us?
That's 9/20/15 at that would be 0100 hours.
And in non-military time, what time is that?
1 a.m.
All right, so at 1 a.m., About how many hours, and I'm sorry, doctor, I'm asking you to do some math here, is that following the procedure he had at 2 p.m. prior to that?
Let me look at this just a second. I'm not sure whether they are using civilian time or military time.
Sure, doctor. And I'll tell you, if you flip to page, let me see, 39, you see that's towards the ends there. You'll be able to tell if they're using military time or civilian time.
$39, you say?
Yes, sir.
They're using military time.
All right, so if this says 0100, 1 a.m.,
That's correct.
and the patient went through surgery and received those drugs at 2 p.m. previously, how many hours would have elapsed between 2 p.m. and the time that this record was made?
Now, wait a minute. 0100 hours, he didn't have the procedure until 1400 hours. So this is at
Right, doctor.
1 a.m. So it's way before his procedure.
Well, actually, doctor, this one's on the 20th. So this is following the procedure. The procedure was on the 19th at 2 p.m.
Okay, all right,
So
right.
does 11
Pardon-
hours
pardon
sound
me,
about
yes,
right?
right, pardon me, you're correct.
All right. So let's walk through what we see here only 11 hours after the procedure was started. And I'm going to ask that you read first what's written under physical assessments, that first line there at the top.
First line is neurological assessment within normal parameters, and the Y stands for yes.
All right. And the following paragraph, what does that mean to you?
Neurological normal parameters alert and oriented to person, place, time, and events. Speech clear and appropriate, moves all extremities equally. No dizziness, numbness, tingling, or syncope. No signs, symptoms of headache. No history of recent seizures.
So is that meant to characterize what was observed in that neurological exam?
Yes.
Do you think, or do you have any reason to believe that this is not accurate for what was observed?
No.
All right, well, I want to hone in then on what's highlighted there on your computer. You'll see the word speech clear and appropriate. Does that mean that Jimmy Reed would have been able to speak at this time?
Yes.
And does that mean that whoever was observing him would have had questions about what he was saying?
Yes.
Or would they have been clear on what he was saying, doctor?
Yes.
Now, doctor, if you'll flip with me to page 36, I want to talk about one more nurse's note. We'll talk about 3 in total. And my co-counsel has already blown it up. It's no different in appearance except for one thing, and you'll notice that's the time. Can you read the time aloud for the jury?
That's 9/20/15, 0900 hours.
That's 9 in the morning on the 20th.
That's correct.
And you see there another Y next to the neurological assessment within normal parameters, right?
That's correct.
Indicating the same abilities of the patient to speak clearly and appropriately and be alert, right?
That's correct.
Doctor, I want to make sure we're clear on this point. Now, you've heard the testimony today. Do you remember the date and the time that Miss Wilson went to see Jimmy Reed?
Yes.
And what was it? When was that?
She was between 9 and 10, I think, is what was stated.
All right, doctor, and let's flip once more to page 39. The last, I'm sorry, no, it's not the last page, but 39. You'll see there, again, a very similar thing we're seeing, just a different time. Could you read the time aloud for the jury?
9/20/15, 1700 hours, that's 5 p.m.
Anything different here?
No difference at all.
Again, meaning that the patient had clear speech, appropriate speech, and he was oriented to vision and things around him. Yes?
That's correct.
All right. So, doctor, I want to ask, in your opinion as Jimmy's treating physician, do you believe that there was ever a period in time there on the 20th, after looking at these notes, that he would have been unable to have communication with someone clearly?
On reviewing these nurses' notes, I would say no.
And do you doubt his ability to have understood the things he was doing in those hours?
I would doubt that he was impaired to the point that he would not know what he was doing, judging from these notes.
Thank you, Doctor. Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Your Honor, permission to retrieve from the witness the exhibit?
Sure.
How are you, sir? Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Reisinger, I understand that you just, opposing counsel just had you look at some nurses' notes and give some testimony on those. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Doctor, you took your own notes from your evaluations, right?
That's correct.
Now, just to be clear, you can't tell us which nurse performed that evaluation, right?
No, but if you had the entire medical record, his or her name would be on that note.
So those nurses' records opposing counsel just put up on that screen, that's not the complete nurses' records.
Probably not.
There's missing information from them. Doctor?
I think the information would be just what nurse documented this.
But certainly, Doctor, you don't know what questions they asked, right?
No.
You don't know how sure their results are.
Could you rephrase that, please?
Sure, Doctor. You don't know how accurate those nurses' results are, since you weren't actually there.
I was not actually there.
But Doctor, you were there for your evaluations, correct?
That's correct.
And you'd be able to read aloud some of your conclusions, isn't that right?
That's correct.
Can we pull up this screen? Doctor, I'm going to show you what's been previously admitted as exhibit number 3, specifically your notes from 9/19 at 7:45 p.m. Doctor, at 7:45 p.m., you went to visit Mr. Reed, isn't that right?
That's correct.
And you found that you needed to defer discussion of treatment options until the patient is more himself, right?
That's correct.
In fact, you said you'll see him again tomorrow when hopefully he will have cleared the anesthesia from his system and you could formulate a treatment plan. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Turning next, Doctor, to your notes from 11:15 that night on 9/19/15. Specifically, Doctor, you noted that he was still in, can we call that out? Thank you. You know that he was still in post-anesthesia stage following the UGI and the ERCP. Is that correct, Doctor?
That's correct.
And following the UGI and ERCP, that's doctor talk for the procedure he went under, right, sir?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, turning to your notes from September 20th, that next morning when you went to see the patient at 10:15. Specifically, Doctor, you found that the patient appeared more ill this morning. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And that is on September 20th, correct?
That's correct.
In fact, you found he may be in discomfort from that same biopsy he had had the day before. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Turning to page 2 of your notes from that meeting that you had on September 20th, you found that he was generally more responsive, but still groggy from the anesthesia. Isn't that right?
That's correct, although he did appear alert and oriented.
That's right, Doctor, but certainly you also noted that he had an NG tube in place, correct?
That's correct.
Could you tell the members of the jury who may not be doctors, what is an NG tube?
It's a tube that's placed down the nose, down the esophagus, into the stomach, and designed to either give fluids, medications, etc., or to relieve gaseous distension of the stomach.
Doctor, specifically it was a feeding tube, isn't that right?
Yes.
James Reed on September 20th couldn't feed himself solid food. Is that right, Doctor?
I do not have that in the nurse's notes.
Well, Doctor, these are your notes. And according to
I did not assess that because I didn't make a note of it.
All right, Doctor. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
I too have to go here. Doctor, may I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Doctor, does the fact that Jimmy Reed couldn't digest solid food in his stomach and his digestive tract directly correlate with whether he would have had any mental capacity impairment?
I would say in this case, it's probably because of his procedure. That's quite a strenuous procedure, and the ERCP is that he probably was still having effects from that.
And did that give you any reason to doubt Jimmy Reed's mental capacity?
No.
Thank you, Doctor. Pass the witness, Your Honor.
No recross, Your Honor.
Okay. You may step down, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we call Mr. Cameron Jordan, the witness that was excluded by invoking the rule. May I retrieve?
Yes, please do.
And Judge, I'm going to have to ask for the marshal because I'm not sure where my witness has gone.
It's been known to happen.
May I ask for the court's recess so our time isn't running during
Well,
this
let's see
moment?
what Professor Powell might have more influence than you do. Let's see what, we'll test him here. What do you say?
Oh, here we go.
So you just gotta have faith in Professor Powell.
Fair enough. Mr. Jordan, if you'll take the stand over here.
Marshal always produces, Your Honor.
I've already complimented you once, but now I'm about to get on, I might tell some other stories if you don't watch out. Proceed.
Mr. Jordan, good afternoon. Can you introduce yourself to the jury?
I'm Cameron Jordan, one of the partners in the Waco Hippodrome.
Could you tell us what the Hippodrome is?
It's a multi-use theater that we have downtown. We show movies and do live events and still have dinner service.
All right, let me ask, you said you're one of the co-owners. Who are the owners at this date?
It is Taylor and Haley.
All right, and to your knowledge, how much ownership does Haley Wilson have?
51%.
Has she always been a co-owner?
No, she hasn't.
Who was the prior co-owner?
Jimmy.
Could you tell us about Jimmy?
Jimmy was one of my personal friends. We met in college, and we're fraternity brothers. Then we were friends even after college. He's I'm a banker, and Jimmy, we worked together. We do loans, and then we wound up going in on some ventures together, and the Hippodrome was one of them.
All right, so you said you were college buddies and even business partners. Were you close friends?
Yes, we were.
And do you think you knew him pretty well?
I think I did.
All right, well, I want to ask you then a little bit about the relationship that he had with Miss Wilson. You're aware of their relationship?
Yes, I am. I introduced him.
Could you tell the jury about that?
I was in the Young Professionals, and I met Haley and thought her and Jimmy would be a good match, and I introduced them about 10 years ago, and they hit it off pretty good.
All right, well, let me ask you this. Did you ever see Haley around the Hippodrome?
When she was with Jimmy, yes,
All right, and did she ever come there to volunteer her time?
occasionally.
All right. Well, let me ask you then about how things progressed with Jimmy. Now, we know that he contracted or was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. We know that he passed away, but I want to ask you, were you able to visit him before he passed?
I was able to visit him once.
Could you tell the jury when that was, if you remember the date?
I don't remember exactly the date.
Was it around September 18th
Yes, I think it
of
was.
2015, I should
Yes.
specify?
Yes.
Now, on that day, could you tell us what happened?
I went to visit Jimmy, and I walked in, and it was like old Jimmy. I mean, you know, he's cracking jokes, and we were talking about football, and
Objection, Your Honor. May we constructively approach?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor, as to the relevance of this line of testimony. We're here about Mr. Reed's condition. On September 20th, at the time he signed the note, This witness is testifying about Mr. Reed's condition on September 18th, 2 days before Ms. Wilson obtained the
Objection's
note.
overruled. That goes to the weight that you're, consider that.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Wilson, I'll re-ask the question. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened that day on the 18th when you saw your buddy Jimmy?
As far as,
The things y'all discussed, without quoting him directly, of course, but the things you discussed.
we discussed football and we discussed business and just how he was doing. And
All right. So you said he was talking about football. How well did it seem that he was remembering things?
he remembered, I mean, he always liked to pat himself on the back, so he remembered his old glory days in high school and was telling us how games went and whatnot, so.
So about how long ago, not to bring up age, but how long ago would that have been that he was recalling stuff from?
Probably 40 years, I guess,
All right.
30, 40 years.
And did it seem to you that he missed anything or misremembered anything?
He seemed pretty sharp.
You said you also talked business with him. Could you tell the jury generally what y'all discussed?
We discussed the Hippodrome, and he wanted to make some changes to it, and he always, wanted to try to make that place better. So, yeah, we discussed that some.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. Now, you're aware, obviously, that he gave the gift to Miss Wilson on the 20th, right?
Yes.
Could you tell us, were you surprised by that decision?
No, I was
Objection,
not.
Your Honor. Relevance as to this witness surprised by that decision.
Yes, Your Honor. The witness has already testified he was one of Jimmy Reed's best friends, and I'm asking him if this was something out of the usual. Today, opposing counsel's brought a case questioning whether Jimmy Reed had the capacity to do something.
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Cross, Counselor.
So did it surprise you at all that he gave his shares of the Hippodrome to Miss Wilson?
No, it did not.
Can you tell the jury why?
Jimmy, he had a lot of feelings for Miss Wilson, and
Objection, Your Honor. The witness is now speaking to the state of mind of a third party. Certainly, he can testify about what he has personal knowledge of, but he has no personal knowledge or no foundation has been laid to establish his personal knowledge as to how Mr. Reed felt on September 20th.
Overruled, Counselor.
Again, I'll go ahead and ask you to say that once more. You said you thought he had a lot of feelings for Miss Wilson. How'd you know that?
well, they were together for 10 years, and then I know Jimmy felt bad that he was unfaithful, and that I think that was the way that he felt like he said it right. He was at peace by giving her those shares.
Objection, Your Honor. The witness is speculating.
Sustained. Jury will disregard.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Now, I do want to ask and make sure we understand something here. Did you know Haley Wilson before she and Jimmy were an item?
Yes, I did.
Were you friends before that?
Yes, we were.
Have y'all ever taken any trips together?
Yes, we have.
Can you tell the jury about those?
Well, we recently went to Florida. Since Jimmy passed away, I guess we've kind of gotten closer, just because I was such a good friend with Jimmy, and then she, he and her's relationship, and I guess it just being around her, and it helps, deal with losing him, and we've spent more time together, and Florida was one of those times.
About how long ago has it been since you and Miss Wilson have been friends?
Well, we were friends before her and Jimmy started dating, so we've always been friends. It's been over 10 years.
Thank you. Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. You just testified you were friends with Miss Wilson before you were friends with Mr. Reed.
That's correct.
But you were also friends with Miss Wilson before you were friends with Miss Ashbrook, correct?
Yes.
So you were friends with Miss Wilson before you were friends with any of your other partners in the Hippodrome, correct?
No, I was friends with Jimmy before Haley.
So you were friends with Mr. Reed before Miss Wilson.
Correct.
Nevertheless, sir, on September 21st, you received a text message from Miss Wilson, right?
Correct.
That text message actually was a screenshot of a conversation between her and Mr. Reed, right?
Correct.
Now, you looked at that text message on the 21st, right?
Correct.
And you asked her what that text message was about, correct?
Correct.
And she told you Jimmy Reed had given her his shares in the Hippodrome, right?
Correct. I guess, I don't know. Did she? That's correct.
And in fact, sir, you didn't call Mr. Reed to ask him if that was in fact his wishes, right?
No, I did not.
You didn't go to the hospital to check up on him, did you?
No, I did not.
You didn't call Miss Ashbrook and ask her if that was really Mr. Reed's wishes.
No, I did not.
You didn't go to the hospital to ask Miss Ashbrook if Mr. Reed had actually written that note, correct?
It looked like his handwriting. So,
I understand that, sir, but nevertheless, you didn't actually ask Miss Ashbrook if that were his wishes, correct?
correct,
And you knew he was dying, right?
correct,
You knew he was on medication, correct?
correct,
And you knew that medication could have an effect on his mind,
correct.
but you did nothing to check out the note.
That's correct.
You did nothing to make sure that Miss Wilson hadn't taken advantage of Mr. Reed in order to get that note.
I wouldn't think that Miss Wilson would have taken advantage of Jimmy.
And that's based on your personal interaction with her, right?
Correct.
Personal interaction when you were off vacationing together, right?
As friends. Yes, we're friends.
Certainly, sir, you and your friend, Miss Wilson, you went to Florida, isn't that correct?
Friends, yes, we do spend time together.
And that was after you had given her control of the Hippodrome, right?
That's correct.
After you had given her those $1 million shares,
The 51%, that's correct.
which, sir, you'd agree were worth over $1 million.
That's what they say. It hasn't sold yet, so, or it hasn't sold, so. But yes, I gave her 51%.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. No further questions, Your Honor.
Anything further?
I want to visit with you really quickly about the timeline of events that opposing counsel just brought up. Now, Ms. Wilson sent you a screenshot. Do you remember about when that was?
I don't remember exactly when that was.
Would it have been around the time?
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's getting ready to ask a leading question. The witness said he doesn't remember. If counsel's not going to refresh the witness's memory, then counsel's going to suggest an answer in his question.
Rephrase your question, let's see if we can.
Yes, Your Honor. Do you remember exactly whether Jimmy had passed when you received that text message?
I don't think he had passed yet.
Now, when was it that you actually saw the note that gave the shares to Ms. Wilson?
That was after he passed.
And when, okay. And so had you been shown the note at any time prior to his passing?
No, I had not.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
No recross, Your Honor. We just ask will the witness be allowed to step down.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we'd like to be heard outside the presence of the jury.
Okay.
Your Honor, again, at this time, we'd like to renew our prior motion asking that this court enter verdict judgment as a matter of law, precluding the jury from hearing the question of whether Mr. Reed had capacity to give this inter vivos gift on September 20th, 2015. Again, Your Honor, we've heard the fact that he was on different pain medications and that he did suffer pain, but his treating physician specifically stated he did not doubt his mental capacity on September 20th. Additionally, Your Honor, we've heard from his friends and Ms. Wilson herself, who all said that they thought he had the capacity when they visited him and that they were not surprised whatsoever that he made the decision to give the Hippodrome's controlling interest to Ms. Wilson. Yes, Your Honor, and with that, Your Honor, I would say that the jury no reasonable jury would be able to find by a preponderance of the evidence that in fact that Mr. Reed did not have capacity.
You have anything further than what you said before, Counselor?
No, Your Honor.
It's denied.
Yes, Your Honor. May we ask for a brief recess before closing arguments?
Sure. 10 minutes?
Your Honor, just a point of clarification. I'm under the belief that Your Honor is going to have some kind of jury instruction conference.
Yeah, but you wanted a break. We're going to have a jury instruction charge, I guess, after 10. You needed a
After the break, or
Actually, Your Honor, if opposing counsel is amenable to it, I would have that discussion prior to the break.
I just wanted to clarify when that discussion was going to happen.
Well, we'll be out for 15 minutes. Let's have our discussion for about briefly. Mr. Powell, Mr. Marshall, where am I going to have that discussion? Are we going to do it just in here? Okay. We're going to kill the sounds. Or do you want the discussion on the record? Okay, it's on the record then. Hear from the plaintiff first as to what questions are you wanting to submit to the jury?
Yes, Your Honor. The question we're looking to submit to the jury can be found on page 5,
I'm looking at it.
which is, Your Honor,
Well, let me make sure that my pages might be different. Tell me what the question is.
Your Honor, it's a question. Did James Shane Reed lack sufficient mental capacity to execute Exhibit Number 1, which is the note that signed over his shares?
As you got a definition to go with that there?
Yes, Your Honor. Would Your Honor like for me to read it aloud?
Yeah, why don't you put that in the record, make sure we all got it.
Yes, Your Honor. Sufficient mental capacity means the ability of James Shane Reed to know and understand in a reasonable manner the nature and character of the transaction engaged he in. Although a person in a confused state of mind may have the intention to give away property, if James Shane Reed's mental capacity is such that he is incapable of realizing the practical effect of doing so, of appreciating the significance of the act, or of comprehending the relationship of things, the gift is not consummated. Answer yes or no.
That's your request. What's your response? Other than saying there's not sufficient evidence, but
Yes, Your Honor.
that's the record's preserved.
Assuming that a question must be submitted to the jury, we are happy with the wording of this question and the definition that goes with it.
Okay, it's being received without objection, Counselor.
Yes, Your Honor.
So the preliminary instructions, do you have any objections to those of the jury charge?
No, Your Honor.
Defendant have any?
Neither from the defense, Your Honor.
Okay, this jury charge conference is over with. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Is
Yes,
that
Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
sufficient for counsel? We ready to proceed with closing arguments for the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor.
You ready?
We are, Your Honor.
Let's proceed. Y'all got your times?
Yes, Your Honor, and I ask that any remaining time I have be reserved for rebuttal.
Right.
May it please the court, Your Honor,
Counsel.
opposing counsel, members of the jury. Good afternoon again. On September 20th, 2015, the man you see in this picture, well, he wasn't making the decisions anymore. He wasn't the same man that's seen here with his sister, healthy, aware of his surroundings, able to think critically and reason, to understand what's going on, why he's doing the things he's doing. The man you see in this picture, that's not the Jimmy Reed that signed away his life's work to Miss Wilson. Because today the evidence has shown, by a preponderance of the evidence, that on September 20th, Jimmy Reed lacked the ability to understand what he was doing, why he was doing it, and what the consequences would be for doing that stuff. And members of the jury, as the judge will explain, unlike what opposing counsel said in his opening statement, you can't just give away your property because you want to. No, in fact, the law says if you lack the mental ability to understand and appreciate what you're doing, that's not a valid transfer of property. And at the point someone keeps that property, if they keep property that they wrongfully acquired from someone who was under the influence of so many prescription drugs, he couldn't understand what he was doing. Well, the law says that is wrong. On September 20th, Jimmy Reed was locked out of his own mind, which is why his family has brought to you today a claim. That's why we're here. Because his family wants to recover his life's work and his legacy and return it to where it rightfully belongs. Now, the judge is going to charge you with the law, and he's going to explain it in depth, but essentially today you're going to have to answer a question. Did James Shane Reed lack sufficient mental capacity to execute Exhibit 1? So why don't we start there? Let's start with Exhibit 1. Let's start by looking at what the defense is telling you was the writing of a very aware man. A man who wasn't affected by these drugs he was on. And the first thing we know, as members of the jury, the first thing we see is that he couldn't even spell his longtime girlfriend's name correctly. Miss Wilson took the stand and she tried to tell you, well, I wasn't offended. But it's not a question of whether or not she was offended. No, the question is whether or not this is a sign of a man who was able to comprehend what he was doing, or the sign of a man who was under the influence of prescription narcotics. And in order to answer that question, the plaintiff called to you 2 doctors. Just like we told you we were going to call 2 doctors. Because you see, today we told you we would prove 3 things. First, we told you we were going to prove that Jimmy Reed was gravely ill. Second, we were going to prove that during the time he was hospitalized for his illness, he was given powerful prescription drugs. And 3, at the time he signed away his legacy, he was under the influence of those prescription drugs. That's what we told you we'd prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence. And that is exactly what we proved to you by a preponderance of the evidence. You heard the testimony. You heard the testimony of both Dr. Morrison and Dr. Reisinger. And what did they tell you? Well, we walked through a chart of those prescription drugs. Because you see, there was never a question. Everyone agreed that, well, Jimmy Reed was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. He was gravely ill. The question was whether or not he received prescription medication to treat that illness. And that's why we walk through this chart day by day to show you not only the drugs he was taking, but the lasting effect those drugs would have. And when we look specifically at the days in question, we find out that on the afternoon of September 19th at 2 p.m., Jimmy Reed received what Dr. Reisinger characterized as a chemical cocktail, so that he could undergo a biopsy. He could undergo a serious medical procedure. We heard here today how that procedures, prescriptions affected him and lasted throughout the night and into the next day. So much so that Dr. Reisinger, the attending physician, looked at all of you under oath and testified, we had to defer discussing medical treatment options. Members of the jury, no matter what defense counsel may dislike about Dr. Reisinger's opinions, what is clear from his notes is that on the night of 9/19, Dr. Reisinger questioned Jimmy Reed's ability to care for his own well-being. So much so that he didn't feel comfortable discussing medical treatment with the man. We also heard this testimony confirmed from Dr. Morrison, who told us this was typical of these type of drugs, that these type of drugs would have this effect on a reasonable man, a reasonably healthy man. And so the question becomes, on September 20th, was Jimmy Reed a reasonably healthy man? Luckily, Dr. Morrison and Dr. Reisinger's opinions confirm he wasn't. You see, we heard from Dr. Morrison that Jimmy Reed, his kidneys were failing. His liver had cancer in it. His body couldn't filter out those powerful prescription drugs. In fact, we heard that this man, this 6'2" giant, was 155 pounds. He was malnourished. He was weak. He was sick. And yet, the defense would come before you and say that he still had the mental capacity to sign away everything he'd worked for. But the most telling testimony here today actually came from the defendant herself, Miss Wilson, because she took the stand and she told us about her interaction with Jimmy Reed on September 20th, that morning, at 9 a.m. Now, opposing counsel is going to tell you that there's a nurse's report that says Jimmy Reed was receiving a neurological assessment at that time. But members of the jury, I'm going to remind you of her testimony. She said between that same time period, she was in the room with Mr. Reed. And she said there weren't any nurses in there. There was no one else in there. In fact, Jimmy told her he was in a lot of pain. But that's not the interesting tidbit. No, the most interesting tidbit that she testified to was when she said Jimmy showed her a button. A button we found out here today administered a shot of morphine. And we found out that Jimmy Reed, he was locked out. I asked Dr. Reisinger, what does that mean? And Dr. Reisinger explained that means he had clicked it so many times that morning that the allotted amount of morphine he could have in his system was already gone. When he signed away his fortune, Jimmy Reed was under the influence of so many prescription drugs, he couldn't tell which way was up and which way was down. He was locked out of his rational mind. And today you have the power to right this wrong. Hold them liable.
Defendant?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court,
Counsel?
opposing counsel, and members of the jury. When someone is on their deathbed and they make their last wishes with what to do with their property when they're gone, you don't get to undo those decisions just because you don't like them. I want to take you back once more to where this story actually begins. You see, it's in 2005 that Miss Wilson and Mr. Jimmy Reed meet. They go on that blind date. They share drinks, laughs, movie quotes, and their love is off to a race. From there, they start a relationship where the two push each other in their passions. In 2009, after graduating from beauty school, Miss Wilson sets out as an entrepreneur and opens her own business. Jimmy supports her, provides her with a home of his that she can live in, and then a year later, he opens the Hippodrome. His passion, where the movies and his ability to redo properties and flip them into something productive combine. It's the Hippodrome where these two spend countless days working together. Haley gets off work. She heads down each and every day, from the kitchen to the books to the theater, just so that she can see the love of her life's dreams come to success. What we know is that after a year, they were already in the black. They made back their investment, Jimmy, the plaintiff, and the co-investor, Cameron Jordan. The Hippodrome was a success. Now, we know that the two had a lively romance, but we also know the other side of the coin, that Jimmy Reed was not faithful. And for that reason, after 10 years of dating one another, Miss Wilson decided to break up with him. A reasonable decision, we'd all agree under the circumstances, and a choice no one would question. For 2 months, she didn't respond to Jimmy's unwavering reaching out. He never stopped reaching out, as she testifies. But finally, she gave in. He was persistent. Yes, I'll go to dinner with you. We can talk. And the days go on, and they go back to the Hippodrome, where Jimmy and her can watch movies in the theater all to themselves. And they reminisce about their trips to Paris and Louisiana. And they watch his favorite movie, Casablanca. A classic, one he loves to quote time and time again. Unfortunately, Mr. Reed was diagnosed with that stage 4 cancer before he ever had the chance to win back Miss Wilson's heart. He succumbed to his illness on September 25th, 2015. Now, as you heard today, before he passed, he had the opportunity to see the love of his life once more. You heard on September 20th that Miss Wilson visited. She went into his hospital room. The plaintiff assisted in making sure no one would be around so the two of them could have some time together. That's what the two wanted. You heard that as soon as Miss Wilson walked in, Jimmy looked at her. He smiled, and he said he's the luckiest man on the planet. She laughed, She cried. She embraced the love of her life. Instead of the sound of footsteps in the hallway or the sound of that beeping monitor, it was the sound of laughter as the two reminisced on the good times past. And after about 45 minutes, Jimmy Reed reached over to the side of his bed where he picked up a notepad and a pen. And he wrote down, "Haley, we'll always have Paris. I give you all my shares of stock in the Hippodrome. JSR, Jimmy Shane Reed, September 20th, 2015. Haley opens the note and she's shocked. I can't believe he's doing this. Jimmy, this isn't right. And he insists, I want you to have it. She folds it back up and she puts it in her purse. She's still shocked the moment she walks out of that hospital room. Of course, she doesn't sprint down here to downtown Waco and run up to the box office saying, "Congrats, everyone, I own the Hippodrome." That's not what she's worried about. The love of her life is clinging to hope in a hospital bed, and she's not worried about asserting that 51% interest. As we know, Jimmy Reed passed away 4 days later. They never had the chance to fully rekindle that flame. But Jimmy Reed had the chance to do whatever he could before he passed to try to heal that pit of regret for his infidelity. He did what he could to provide for Miss Wilson, again, the love of his life, even beyond his death. He knew Miss Wilson's no stranger at the Hippodrome. She's been there and she's worked every little part of it. She too shared the good times. He can leave it in good hands with her. Now, as we've heard today, this is an inter vivos gift case, which means we're here to ask if a gift given during the life of someone is valid. And opposing counsel's right. You don't get to do whatever you want with your property, because if in fact you don't have the capacity, then the law allows for a remedy. As I mentioned earlier, if you do have the capacity, you do get to give the gifts you want. Jimmy Reed had that capacity. The plaintiff had the burden of proof. That means it's been Mr. Clark's job throughout the entirety of this trial to bring forth enough evidence from this witness stand to convince you that it is more likely than not that Jimmy Reed was so incapacitated on September 20th, 2015, that he didn't know the consequences of giving Miss Wilson that 51%. That is not the evidence we heard from the witness stand today. You see, first, we heard a lot of medical testimony. We heard from Dr. Reisinger, Jimmy Reed's treating physician. We also heard from Dr. Morrison, a paid consultant. Dr. Morrison took the stand, and he walked you through his background. And not to take anything away from his ability to conduct emergency medicine, we did discuss the other side of his business. The fact that routinely he has been brought by plaintiff's counsel for these exact type of cases, medical cases, in which he's been depended on to reliably deliver big jury verdicts. When asked, he agreed $1.275 million is a big jury verdict. Members of the jury, I bring this up so that when you have the opportunity to go through the records, to listen and remember the testimony you heard from the witness stand, that you remember he's here on behalf of the plaintiff. Dr. Reisinger was in the hospital on behalf of Jimmy Reed. He attended to him from September 17th all the way until his unfortunate death on September 25th. He and his colleague physicians and nurses went and provided the treatment and the drugs that we've heard so much about today. And I asked him if he ever doubted his patient's mental capacity on the day he gave Miss Wilson that gift? And he said affirmatively, no. And then we looked even in more detail. We looked at the notes kept by those walking the floor. As Dr. Reisinger told you, the nurses who are there more often than the doctors are. And he told you that at 1 a.m. following that surgery, only 11 hours after undergoing the anesthetic drugs, mind you, not the painkillers, but the 3 that were administered for the purpose of surgery, that his speech was clear and appropriate. I asked him, does that mean you'd have any questions about what he's saying? Would that mean you couldn't understand him? He said no. At 1 a.m., his speech was clear and appropriate. And then we looked at the next time, 9 a.m. And again, his speech was clear and appropriate. He oriented to person, place, time, and events. No dizziness, numbness, no signs, symptoms of headache. Jimmy Reed passed the neurological test for the second time. And then again at 5 p.m. the next day, where he again passed the neurological examination. Now, members of the jury, opposing counsel said that he was going to prove to you 3 things today. That Jimmy Reed was gravely ill, that he was on powerful prescription medicines, and that he was under the influence of them while he was in the hospital. Members of the jury, he's right. All 3 of those things are true. We know Jimmy Reed had pancreatic cancer. He was gravely ill. We know he was given prescription drugs. You cannot go buy morphine over the counter. And we know that he was under the influence of them. Yes, they were in his bloodstream. He's right on all 3 of those things. This case is not about those 3 things. This case is about capacity. Whether Jimmy Reed was able to give the gift he gave. You see, this is the question you'll be asked at the end of today's trial. Did Jimmy Shane Reed lack the sufficient mental capacity to execute Exhibit 1, the note we've seen today? Members of the jury, the only answer to that question is a no. He did not lack sufficient mental capacity. Now, the plaintiff has attempted to poke some holes in the relationship between Mr. Reed and Miss Wilson in an attempt to say to you that, in fact, he couldn't have wanted to give this gift. In fact, his capacity would indicate, the relationship would indicate the only way he gave the gift was if he didn't have the capacity. But the truth is, members of the jury, when on your deathbed, life is changing. When you are facing a terminal illness, people change. Jimmy Reed had the opportunity to see the woman he loved most for the last time. We can agree they didn't have a perfect relationship. They were not the type of book you'd read in the story you'd read in a romance novel. But at the end of the day, that's not the question you're asked. That question doesn't mention anything about whether their romance was sufficient for a gift. It doesn't ask about, are you sure he loved her enough? Members of the jury, it asks about capacity. And the only medical professional who came to this room and spoke to us said he had it. And that was verified by Miss Wilson, who told you herself, she said, Jimmy, I'm not sure about this. She told you she was confused, surprised, and even worried. Yet Jimmy verified his wish in the hospital when he said, I want you to have it, and he verified it again the next day after that 24-hour period when he texted her back and said, here's looking at you, kid. Not a random sequence of words, but a quote. A quote from his favorite movie that he and Miss Wilson have seen time and time again, Casablanca. Members of the jury, there is no doubt that Jimmy Reed wanted to give this gift to Miss Wilson. In a few moments, you'll go back in that jury room and deliberate, and that's after Mr. Clark has had the ability to come up here and speak with you once more. And after you do that, you'll look at that jury question, and you'll have to answer the question it's posing. And I'm confident that you'll find that Mr. Reed did not lack the capacity to make that gift. And I'm confident you'll tell the plaintiff, you don't get to undo someone's decision just because you don't like it. Thank you.
Nothing. No. Rebuttal, Your Honor.
Counsel?
You don't get to undo someone's decision because you don't like it. That's not why we're here. Dr. Reisinger sat in this chair and told you that Jimmy Reed still had those 5 drugs in his system. More importantly, even by Haley Wilson's own account, right before she had entered the room, Jimmy Reed had locked himself out of his morphine drip. This is a man who was not only on his deathbed, which opposing counsel says on your deathbed life changes. Well, on morphine, Dilaudid, propofol, Versed, and fentanyl, reality changes. Your ability to perceive what's in front of you changes. That's why Jimmy Reed couldn't remember her name. That's why Jimmy Reed couldn't spell her name on the letter. Members of the jury, Jimmy Reed was locked out of his rational mind. That is the question. Not romance novels, not who loved who. It's a question of at the time he signed away his life's work and his legacy, did he have the capacity? The evidence couldn't be clearer. Find them liable.
All right, this matter now presented to the jury. I guess everybody goes out? Okay. We'll let you know after they tally our ballots. Okay. Be seated. Before I announce the winner, I want to express my own thoughts, and I know that I'm joined in the members of this distinguished jury of trial lawyers in these thoughts. That is, I want to congratulate both teams. You're excellent, excellent. I sat on the bench for 12 years, and I can tell you that your advocacy skills, both of you, are better than a large number of lawyers that appeared before me in the United States District Court. With that, with the decision of the jury is in favor of the defendant, the winning, Mr. Marsh. You are the winner. Congratulations. All right. With that, the court is now in recess, and the Top Gun competition for 2017 is concluded.